At our divorce hearing, my husband sneered, telling me I would never touch a single dime of his money again. His young mistress laughed from the gallery, whispering that I was about to be homeless. But then the judge opened the sealed manila envelope I had just submitted. He skimmed the single document inside, and a slow, booming laugh echoed through the courtroom. "Oh, this is too good," the judge said, looking right at my husband. The color drained from their faces, and in that exact moment, they realized I had just taken absolutely everything. I am Natalie, 33 years old, and until a chilly Tuesday in October, I actually believed my marriage was a partnership. I worked as an estate appraiser here in Chicago, uncovering hidden value in forgotten antiques, but somehow I completely missed the worthless fake sitting in my own living room. Before I tell you how I brought my arrogant husband and his mistress to their knees, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit that like button and subscribe if you have ever trusted someone who turned out to be your worst enemy. It all started with something incredibly mundane. I was standing at the checkout line of an upscale grocery store in our affluent Chicago suburb. My cart was full of Bradley's favorite items: artisan cheeses, organic steaks, a bottle of imported red wine to celebrate his recent promotion to chief financial officer at a rising tech startup. I felt a sense of pride as I watched the cashier ring up the items. We had finally made it. The years of struggling of eating cheap noodles and clipping coupons were supposed to be behind us. The cashier, a young girl chewing gum, announced the total: $247. I pulled out my primary debit card, the one linked to our joint savings and checking accounts, and inserted it into the chip reader. I stared at the small screen, waiting for the familiar approved message. Instead, the machine let out a sharp, angry beep. The screen flashed a bright red declined notification. I smiled apologetically at the cashier, assuming it was a simple chip malfunction. "Please try it again," I said, pulling the card out and wiping the metal chip on my sleeve. "Sometimes this machine acts up." She sighed, popping her gum, and pressed a button on her register. "Go ahead." I inserted the card a second time. The same sharp beep echoed through the checkout lane. "Declined." A hot flush of embarrassment crept up my neck. The woman standing behind me in line shifted her weight loudly. Her heavy sigh meant entirely for me to hear. I felt the eyes of the other shoppers boring into my back. This had to be a mistake. Our joint account had over $150,000 in it. We had been saving that money for a down payment on a larger house in Lincoln Park. "Let me step aside and call my bank," I told the cashier, grabbing my purse. "I am so sorry for the delay. It must be a fraud alert glitch. My bank is notoriously overprotective when I buy expensive wine." I wheeled my cart out of the main flow of traffic and leaned against a display of seasonal pumpkins. My hands were trembling slightly as I dialed the customer service number on the back of my card. I navigated the automated voice prompts, growing increasingly frustrated with every robotic instruction. Finally, a real human answered the line. "Hello, my name is Brenda. How can I help you today?" I quickly explained the situation, providing my account number and verifying my identity with my social security number and mother's maiden name. "Brenda." "My card was just declined at the grocery store," I said, trying to keep my voice light and unbothered. "I am assuming a fraud alert was triggered on the account. Could you please clear it so I can pay for my groceries?" There was a long silence on the other end of the line. I could hear the rapid clicking of a keyboard. "Ms. Williams." Brenda said, her voice suddenly lacking its previous cheerful customer service tone. "Your card was not declined due to a fraud alert. Your card was declined for insufficient funds." I laughed, a short, breathless sound of pure confusion. "That is literally impossible, Brenda. We have a joint savings account linked to that debit card for overdraft protection. There is $150,000 in that savings account. Please refresh your screen." The clicking resumed, followed by another agonizing pause. "Ma'am, I am looking at your linked savings account right now. The current balance is $0.00. The grocery store around me seemed to spin. The colorful displays, the harsh fluorescent lights, the chatter of other shoppers all faded into a muffled, distorted hum. $0. That money was my blood, sweat, and tears. When Bradley decided he wanted to get his Master of Business Administration 8 years ago, his parents, Thomas and Catherine, refused to pay a single cent. They claimed it built character. So I built his character for him. I worked 3 jobs. I appraised estates during the day, waitressed at a diner until midnight, and did freelance graphic design on the weekends. I paid for his tuition. I paid our rent. I funded his entire future while sacrificing my own comfort. That $150,000 was the culmination of my relentless hustle and our combined savings over a decade. Where did the money go? I demanded, my voice cracking, abandoning any pretense of politeness. Who took it? When Brenda's voice softened with professional pity, a wire transfer for the entire amount was initiated at 2 o'clock this morning. It was authorized by the primary account holder, Bradley Williams. The funds were moved to an external unverified account. Because he is a joint owner, the transaction is completely valid. I dropped my phone. It clattered onto the polished linoleum floor. The cashier looked over, her eyes wide with alarm. I did not bother picking up my groceries. I left the cart sitting right there next to the pumpkins, pushed my way through the automatic sliding doors, and sprinted into the freezing October air. My mind was a chaotic tornado of terrifying scenarios as I unlocked my car. Bradley would never do this. He was a meticulous financial officer. He tracked every penny we spent on a spreadsheet. He would never blindly wire our life savings to an external account in the middle of the night. Had he been hacked? Was someone holding him at gunpoint? Did someone steal his identity and bypass the two-factor authentication? I jammed the key into the ignition, my hands shaking so violently I could barely put the car in drive. I sped out of the parking lot, breaking multiple traffic laws as I raced toward our house. My chest was tight, my breathing shallow and panicked. I kept dialing his cell phone over and over again, but every single call went straight to voicemail. Please let him be alive, I prayed silently, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. Please let this just be a terrible cyber attack. I pulled into our driveway, the tires screeching against the concrete. Bradley's car was parked in its usual spot. I threw my car door open and sprinted up the front steps, fumbling blindly with my house keys. I threw my entire body weight against the heavy oak door, terrified of the bloody crime scene I might find inside. But as the door swung open, the reality waiting for me in the foyer was infinitely worse than any home invasion I could have imagined. There was no broken glass. There was no overturned furniture, and absolutely no sign of a violent struggle. Instead, the air conditioning was humming quietly, and the house smelled faintly of expensive cedarwood cologne. Bradley stood right in the center of our sunlit living room. He was completely unharmed, perfectly healthy, and calmly folding his custom Italian suits. He placed each jacket with meticulous care into a massive, pristine designer suitcase resting on our coffee table. He looked up for a fraction of a second when I practically fell through the doorway, panting and terrified. His expression held zero concern. There was no relief in his eyes at seeing me safe. It was a look of mild annoyance, exactly the kind of look one might give a waiter who brought the wrong appetizer. His utter lack of emotion sent a freezing chill straight down my spine. I demanded to know what was going on. I yelled that the bank said the money was gone, that our entire life savings had been wiped out in the middle of the night. I was shaking, waiting for him to tell me we had been hacked, or that this was some massive banking error. He did not rush over to comfort me. He did not drop what he was doing to explain. He simply zipped up the left compartment of his suitcase, smoothing out a non-existent wrinkle on his perfectly pressed slacks. Then he walked over to the kitchen island, picked up a thick manila envelope, and casually tossed it across the marble surface. It slid to a halt right in front of me, bumping gently against my purse. He told me to open it without a shred of empathy in his voice. My fingers felt like heavy lead as I reached for the envelope. I tore the flap open and pulled out the crisp white documents inside. The bold black letters at the top of the first page read, "Petition for dissolution of marriage. Divorce papers." I stared at the thick stack of legal documents, my brain completely failing to process the words printed on the page. I asked him why. I asked him where our money went and what this was all about. I reminded him that we were supposed to be shopping for a new house next month. Bradley finally looked at me slowly, buttoning the cuffs of his designer shirt. He sighed heavily, speaking to me with the slow, exaggerated patience one might use with a dim-witted child who had just asked a stupid question. He claimed his tech startup was completely underwater. According to him, the company had hemorrhaged capital over the last 2 quarters. Investors were pulling out left and right, and he was personally liable for massive corporate debts. He said he had to empty our joint accounts at 2 in the morning to pay off aggressive creditors and avoid federal prison. He actually stood there in his expensive clothes and framed his theft as if he were doing me a huge favor. He claimed he took the money and filed for divorce to protect me from the impending legal and financial fallout. He said he was falling on his sword to keep my name out of the bankruptcy filings. I screamed that he had absolutely no right to steal my money. I reminded him that I earned every single cent of that money while he studied, that I sacrificed my own comfort, worked triple shifts, and exhausted myself to build that savings account so he could get his degree debt-free. I expected him to show a shred of guilt, or at least lower his eyes in shame. Instead, he laughed. It was a cold, sharp, arrogant sound that completely stripped away the last decade of our marriage. He told me to stop being so incredibly dramatic. He waved his hand dismissively at me and called my job an absolute joke. He sneered, looking me up and down with deep contempt, as if I were a stranger who had tracked mud onto his expensive rugs. He called me a dusty estate appraiser who spent her days digging through dead people's garbage hoping to find a lucky trinket. He stated outright that my meager salary could never sustain the high-level lifestyle a chief financial officer required. He said he was tired of pretending we were equals in this relationship. He told me that my small-town mindset and my obsession with saving pennies were an anchor dragging him down into absolute mediocrity. According to Bradley, he was destined for greatness, and I was just the temporary stepping stone he no longer needed to achieve his dreams. I stood there clutching the divorce papers, the devastating realization violently washing over me. The man I loved was completely gone, replaced by this greedy, arrogant stranger who felt entirely entitled to destroy my life for his own convenience. He had used me to build his financial foundation, and now that he wanted a penthouse view, he was happily kicking me out into the cold. My chest heaved as I tried to find the words to fight back against the sheer cruelty standing in my living room. I wanted to tear him apart, to demand my money back, to scream until my voice gave out. But before I could utter a single syllable, a loud, aggressive engine roared right outside our front window. The unmistakable purr of a high-performance sports car echoed through the quiet suburban street, disrupting the heavy silence of our ruined home. We both turned toward the front window as tires crunched loudly on our gravel driveway. The sound signaled that this nightmare was far from over. The heavy oak door did not just swing open. It was shoved wide open by a woman who clearly felt she already owned the very ground I was standing on. Sloane stepped directly into the foyer without a single ounce of hesitation. She was 26 years old, Bradley's executive assistant, and a woman I had personally bought a generous Christmas gift for just a few months ago because Bradley claimed she worked so incredibly hard for his team. She did not bother to knock. She did not wipe her designer heels on the welcome mat. She just strolled in as if she held the deed to the property. Sloane surveyed my carefully curated living room with absolute, undisguised disgust. She carried a sleek silver clipboard, tapping an expensive gold pen against it as she walked past me without so much as a greeting. She looked at the gorgeous hand-restored mid-century modern sofa I had spent 8 months acquiring and literally sneered. She made a loud clicking sound with her tongue, marking a thick, aggressive line on her clipboard. "This entire room smells like a dusty old thrift store," Sloane announced to the open space, completely ignoring my presence, as if I were totally invisible. She pointed her pen directly at my prized Victorian mahogany display cabinet. "Bradley, you have to tell the junk removal crew to smash that hideous thing first. I cannot stand looking at it for one more second. It completely ruins the modern minimalist aesthetic we agreed on for the remodel." I stood frozen in place, my hands clenching the divorce papers until the sharp paper edges dug painfully into my palms. I looked from Sloane to Bradley, fully expecting him to correct her, or at least show a fleeting moment of guilt for bringing his arrogant mistress into our marital home while his wife was still standing right there. Instead, Bradley just smiled warmly at her, a gentle, loving smile he had not directed at me in years. He casually walked over and kissed her cheek, confirming every horrible, humiliating suspicion that was currently tearing my heart apart. "You have absolutely no right to be inside my house," I finally managed to say, my voice shaking heavily with a dangerous mixture of profound grief and boiling rage. "Get out right now before I call the police and have you arrested for trespassing." Sloane finally turned her head to look at me. She did not look intimidated. She did not look embarrassed. She looked highly amused by my threat. She let out a high melodic laugh that echoed harshly off the walls of my living room. Then deliberately and slowly, she reached up with one perfectly manicured hand and intentionally brushed her fingers against her collarbone. That was when the afternoon light caught it. A massive, blindingly brilliant diamond tennis necklace rested against her skin. The stones were absolutely flawless, catching the sun from the window and throwing fractured rainbows across the room. My breath caught painfully in my throat. I am a professional estate appraiser. I spend my entire life evaluating high-end jewelry and luxury assets for wealthy clients. I knew exactly what a custom piece like that cost. It was easily worth $60,000 or $70,000. My eyes locked onto the heavy diamonds, and a sickening wave of total clarity washed over my entire body. Bradley had just claimed he desperately needed my life savings to pay off aggressive corporate creditors to avoid going to federal prison. Yet here was his 26-year-old assistant parading around my living room, wearing my late-night shifts, my missed weekends, and my canceled vacations right around her neck. My $150,000 had not gone to save a failing tech startup. It had gone directly to a luxury jeweler to buy the affection of a younger woman. "I think you are severely confused about who needs to get out," Sloane said, her voice dripping with pure malice and superiority. She took a confident step closer to me, her expensive floral perfume completely overpowering the faint scent of cedarwood in the room. "Bradley already explained the financial situation to you. You are the one trespassing in our home now." She tapped her clipboard aggressively against the marble kitchen island. "You really need to pack your cheap little bags a lot faster than this. The luxury interior decorators are coming first thing on Monday morning, and I absolutely refuse to let them see this hideous antique garbage you hoarded. We are gutting this entire place down to the studs, and I want your junk gone by Sunday night." I looked back at Bradley, who was watching the entire exchange with a smug, satisfied smirk on his face. He crossed his arms casually over his chest, clearly enjoying the show as his young mistress publicly humiliated his wife of 8 years. He was not a desperate man trying to save his career from sudden bankruptcy. He was a calculated predator who had just finished stripping his prey down to the bone. The sheer brazen disrespect of the entire situation forced my panicked brain to stop reacting and start analyzing. My professional instincts, the specific skills that allowed me to spot a clever forgery from a mile away, suddenly kicked into massive overdrive. I looked at the sleek sports car parked outside. I looked at Sloane's clipboard filled with detailed expensive renovation plans that would have taken several weeks to draft and approve. I looked at the blinding diamonds resting against her throat. And then I looked down at the divorce papers still gripped tightly in my hand. The dates, the signatures, the elaborate corporate trust structure Bradley mentioned earlier. It all clicked together perfectly, forming a horrifying but crystal clear picture in my mind. This was not a sudden corporate failure. A man drowning in massive corporate debt does not buy a brand new sports car for his mistress. A failing executive does not purchase custom diamond tennis necklaces with company funds. A desperate, terrified husband does not hire a team of luxury interior decorators to completely gut a suburban house on a Monday morning. This was a meticulously calculated long-term exit strategy. Bradley had been planning this betrayal for months, slowly draining our combined resources, setting up complex legal traps, and preparing his luxurious new life with Sloane, while smiling at me across the dinner table every single night. He had waited patiently until the exact moment my savings account hit his target number before pulling the trigger. He thought he had played the perfect game. He thought he had left me completely destitute, broken and powerless, assuming I would be unable to fight back against his high-priced lawyers and corporate maneuvers. Bradley must have seen the realization forming in my eyes, because he immediately stepped between Sloane and me, completely blocking my view of the diamonds. He reached into the inner pocket of his tailored suit jacket and pulled out a single crisp sheet of paper. He slapped it down onto the kitchen counter right next to the divorce petition. "Consider this your official, legally binding 48-hour eviction notice," Bradley stated, his voice flat and businesslike. I stared at the paper, shaking my head in pure disbelief. "You cannot evict me from my own house," I said, my voice rising. "My name is on the deed, Bradley. We bought this place together." Bradley let out a sharp, condescending sigh. "Your name was on the deed, Natalie. Past tense. Do you remember those massive stacks of corporate tax documents I asked you to sign last month? The ones you barely skimmed because you were so exhausted from appraising that dusty estate in Oak Park." A cold knot formed in the pit of my stomach. I remembered perfectly. He had rushed into my home office late at night, claiming his startup needed my signature for a routine spousal asset disclosure to secure emergency funding. I trusted my husband. I signed exactly where he pointed. "You signed a quitclaim deed," Bradley explained with a predatory grin. "I transferred full ownership of this property into a corporate trust to use as collateral against my company's fabricated debt. The trust is controlled entirely by my creditors now. And since my company is supposedly going under, the creditors are liquidating the asset, meaning the house is gone. You have until Sunday evening to pack your cheap clothes and get out before the sheriff arrives to physically remove you." Sloane clapped her hands together in mock excitement. "We booked a penthouse suite at the Four Seasons for the weekend," she announced, linking her arm through Bradley's. "It is going to be so romantic. Have fun packing, Natalie. Do not steal any of the good silverware on your way out." Bradley did not even say goodbye. He simply turned his back on me, wrapped his arm around his young mistress, and walked right out the front door. The heavy oak door slammed shut behind them, shaking the picture frames on the walls. A few seconds later, the aggressive roar of the sports car engine echoed down the street, fading away, until there was nothing left but absolute suffocating silence. I stood completely paralyzed in the middle of my living room. My knees finally gave out. I collapsed onto the hardwood floor, the reality of my situation crashing down on me with the force of a freight train. My life had been effectively erased in less than 60 minutes. I had absolutely nothing. The $150,000 I had killed myself to save was gone. The man I had loved and supported for 10 years was a monster. The roof over my head now belonged to a phantom corporate trust. I curled into a ball on the floor, struggling to pull air into my lungs. The panic was entirely physical, crushing my chest and making the room spin. I was 33 years old and utterly destitute. I had no money to hire a divorce attorney. I had no funds to rent a new apartment. I did not even have enough cash in my wallet to buy a hotel room for the night. Bradley had engineered the perfect destruction of my life, leaving me trapped in a burning building with the doors firmly locked from the outside. The despair was so heavy it felt like I was drowning at the bottom of a pitch-black ocean. Then a sharp, sudden vibration against my hip broke through the deafening silence. My phone was buzzing in my pocket. My hands were shaking so violently I could barely grip the device, but I managed to pull it out and stare at the glowing screen. It was a message from Jamal. Jamal is my older sister Rachel's husband. He is a brilliant, fiercely protective African-American man who works as a top-tier cybersecurity expert and forensic accountant for a major financial firm in downtown Chicago. Jamal has always been the rock of our extended family, possessing a razor-sharp intellect and a deep, unwavering loyalty to the people he loves. I had texted him in a blind panic from the grocery store parking lot when the bank told me the money was gone, begging him to figure out if Bradley had been hacked. I swiped the notification to open the text thread. I expected a message offering his condolences, or maybe an offer to let me sleep on their guest room couch. Instead, the words glowing on my screen sent a massive electric jolt of pure adrenaline straight into my veins. Jamal's text read, "Nat, get out of there now and come to my house." I just bypassed his firewall. His accounts aren't overdrawn. He's hiding something massive. I stared at the glowing screen before the gravity of Jamal's words forced my body into motion. I did not collapse again. I did not shed another tear. The paralyzing despair that pinned me to my floor was incinerated by a spark of pure purpose. I grabbed my purse, locked the door behind me, and drove straight to my sister's house to regroup. By the time the sun came up the next morning, the shock had worn off, leaving behind a cold determination. I returned to the house at dawn, knowing the clock was ticking on Bradley's ridiculous eviction notice. I moved through the empty rooms with mechanical efficiency. I ignored my clothes. I ignored the wedding china and sentimental albums. Instead, I focused entirely on packing what mattered for my survival. I carefully placed my professional appraisal equipment, magnifying loops, UV lights, and testing chemicals into a heavy carrying case. Next, I gathered every financial document, tax return, and bank statement I could find stuffed in our home office drawers. I was just taping up a heavy cardboard box filled with my high-net-worth client appraisal files when the violent sound of a drill grinding against metal shattered the quiet morning. Before I could drop the tape dispenser, the front door burst open with a deafening crash. A burly locksmith stepped aside as two incredibly familiar, deeply unwelcome figures stormed into my foyer. It was Thomas and Catherine Bradley's parents. They marched right into my house, radiating the exact same toxic arrogance their son had displayed the day before. Catherine clutched a designer handbag wearing expensive country club tennis attire, her face twisted into a mask of pure disgust. Thomas hovered right behind her arms, crossed, looking at me like I was a rodent infesting his property. "What on earth are you doing here?" I demanded, stepping out of the home office and blocking the hallway. Catherine scoffed loudly, waving a manicured hand in my direction. "We are here to change the locks and make sure you do not steal anything valuable on your way out," she announced, her voice dripping with venom. "Bradley called us late last night. He told us all about how you completely lost your mind when he finally ended this farce of a marriage. He asked us to personally supervise your removal, since he is busy securing his company assets." I stared at them in utter disbelief. "He stole my life savings, abandoned me for a 26-year-old assistant, and you are here to supervise me." Catherine let out a sharp, mocking laugh. "Please, Natalie, drop the pathetic victim act. We all know you have been milking our genius son for 8 long years. You are nothing but a desperate gold digger who actively held him back from his true potential. He is a brilliant financial officer, and you are just some nobody who evaluates old furniture. You should be down on your knees thanking him for letting you ride his coattails this long." The absolute audacity of her statement hit me like a physical blow to the chest. The sheer rewriting of our history was staggering. For years I had bitten my tongue and played the respectful daughter-in-law to keep the peace. I had smiled politely at their lavish holiday dinners while they subtly put me down. But the peace was officially dead, and I had absolutely no reason to hold back anymore. My hands clenched into tight fists at my sides. "A gold digger," I repeated, my voice dropping to a dangerously low register. "You have a lot of nerve calling me a gold digger, Catherine. Where exactly was your genius son's gold when he wanted to get his Master of Business Administration? Because I remember clearly sitting in your pristine living room begging you to help him with his tuition. And I remember you explicitly refusing to pay a single cent, claiming that handing him money would ruin his work ethic." Catherine's face flushed a deep, ugly red, but I refused to let her speak. "Do not you dare stand in my house and act like he is some self-made prodigy. I paid for his degree. I worked 3 exhausting jobs. I appraised estates from dawn until dusk, slung cheap coffee at a diner until midnight, and took freelance design jobs on the weekends. I paid the rent, I bought the groceries, and I funded his entire future, while you two sat in your country club sipping martinis. I built his foundation with my own bare hands, and now you have the absolute gall to stand here and pretend he achieved his success all by himself." Thomas took a threatening step forward, pointing a thick finger directly at my face. "Watch your tone when you speak to my wife," he growled. "You are a bitter, greedy woman who is just angry that Bradley finally realized his worth and upgraded to someone who actually fits into his new social circle." He is moving on to bigger and better things, and you are leaving this property today with exactly what you brought into his life, absolutely nothing. I turned my back on them, refusing to engage with their delusional reality for 1 second longer. I walked straight over to the large cardboard box resting on the hallway table. It contained my most sensitive client files, confidential appraisal reports for some of the wealthiest estate owners in Chicago. It was the absolute lifeline of my professional career, completely separate from Bradley and his toxic family. I grabbed the heavy box by the handles, preparing to walk past them and out the front door. "I will be leaving now," I said coldly. But the moment I lifted the box, Thomas lunged forward. He moved with sudden, surprising violence, his face contorted with rage. He grabbed the front edge of the cardboard box, digging his thick fingers aggressively into the sides. "Give me that box right now," Thomas shouted, yanking it hard toward his massive chest. "Bradley told me you would try to steal his company records. Everything in this house is corporate property now, and you are not taking a single piece of paper out of this building." I gripped the handles tighter, my knuckles turning white as I engaged in a desperate physical tug-of-war with my enraged father-in-law. "Let go of my box right now, Thomas." I gritted through my teeth, refusing to release my tight grip. He yanked harder, his face inches from mine, his breath smelling of stale coffee and aggressive entitlement. "You are taking corporate property," he bellowed, attempting to physically twist the thick cardboard out of my hands. The heavy box tore slightly at the corner. I felt my boots sliding against the polished hardwood floor. I was losing the physical battle against a man twice my size, but I was absolutely determined not to surrender my livelihood. Catherine stood in the background, shouting for the locksmith to come inside and witness me stealing from her son. The situation was rapidly escalating into pure chaos, and my arms were burning with the intense strain of keeping my client files safe from their greedy hands. Then the front door swung completely open, slamming violently against the entryway wall. The sudden noise echoed like a gunshot, freezing everyone in the room. I turned my head just enough to see my older sister Rachel rushing through the threshold with her husband Jamal right behind her. Jamal is an imposing figure, a tall, broad-shouldered African-American man who carries himself with the quiet, dangerous authority of someone who spends his life dismantling highly complex criminal networks. He took one look at the chaotic scene unfolding in my hallway, and his eyes narrowed into a lethal, unyielding glare. Within a fraction of a second, Jamal crossed the distance between the front door and the hallway table. He did not shout. He did not throw a punch. He simply placed his large hand directly over Thomas's wrist, locking his fingers in a vice grip that immediately stopped the older man from pulling the box. "Let go of my sister-in-law right now," Jamal said. His voice was incredibly calm, yet it carried a heavy, undeniable menace that caused the air in the room to instantly freeze. Thomas blinked in shock, momentarily confused by the sudden physical intervention. He tried to yank his arm away, but Jamal's grip was absolute iron. "This is none of your business," Thomas sputtered, his face turning an even deeper shade of crimson. "She is stealing documents from my son's company. We are securing the premises." Jamal slowly released Thomas's wrist and deliberately stepped directly between the enraged older man and me. He completely shielded me from their view, acting as an impenetrable wall. He adjusted his glasses, looking down at Bradley's parents with utter disdain. "You are not securing anything," Jamal stated, his tone dropping to a sharp, clinical precision. "What you are currently doing is committing a federal offense. Physical intimidation, harassment, and attempting to illegally change the locks on a primary residence without a formalized court-ordered eviction notice is a direct violation of state law. Furthermore, attempting to forcibly seize personal property without a warrant constitutes attempted robbery." Catherine stepped forward, her expensive tennis shoes squeaking against the hardwood. "You do not know what you are talking about," she shrieked, pointing an accusing finger at Jamal. "Bradley owns this house. He put it in a corporate trust. We have every right to kick her out." Jamal reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his phone. He tapped the screen once and turned it around so Thomas and Catherine could clearly see the bright display. The numbers 911 were already typed into the dial pad, his thumb hovering right above the green call button. Corporate trust or not, my sister-in-law has established residency, Jamal explained with chilling calmness. I am a forensic investigator who works closely with federal agencies. I know exactly how the law works, and I know exactly what kind of financial games your son is trying to play. If you do not turn around and walk out of this house in the next 5 seconds, I am hitting call. I will gladly let the police arrest you both for assault and illegal eviction. I am sure your wealthy country club friends would love to read about your mugshots in the morning paper. The mention of the police and a public scandal struck a massive nerve. Catherine's face drained of color. She looked at the phone, then at her husband. Thomas opened his mouth to argue, but the sheer unwavering confidence in Jamal's eyes made him falter entirely. The locksmith, who had been lingering awkwardly near the front porch, took one look at the escalating legal threat and immediately backed away, mumbling that he did not want any part of a domestic dispute before hurrying back to his van. Without their hired help and faced with the very real threat of police intervention, the bravado completely drained out of Bradley's parents. Thomas scoffed loudly, attempting to salvage some shred of his shattered pride. He adjusted his jacket, glaring at Jamal with deep resentment. "You are making a massive mistake getting involved in this," Thomas sneered, pointing a finger at me around Jamal's broad shoulder. "She is going to drag you down with her." Catherine grabbed her husband's arm, pulling him toward the door. "Do not even waste your breath on them, Thomas." She glared at me with absolute malice, her eyes narrowing into hateful slits. "You enjoy your little victory today, Natalie, because when my son is finished with you, you will not have a single dime to your name. You will end up completely homeless, sleeping in the gutter where you belong. You are nothing without Bradley. Nothing." With that final venomous threat, Catherine pulled the front door open and stormed out, dragging Thomas behind her. The door clicked shut, leaving a heavy, ringing silence in their wake. As soon as their car engine roared to life and faded down the street, the massive wave of adrenaline that had been keeping me upright suddenly crashed. My knees buckled slightly. Rachel rushed forward, wrapping her arms tightly around my shoulders and pulling me into a fierce, protective hug. "I am so sorry we took so long," Rachel whispered, smoothing my hair as I gripped her jacket for support. "I got here the exact second Jamal called me. You are safe now. They cannot hurt you anymore." I took a shaky breath, stepping back and looking down at the heavy box of appraisal files I had nearly lost. "Thank you," I managed to say, my voice raw and exhausted. They were going to take my client records. They were going to lock me out of my own life. Jamal picked up the heavy cardboard box as easily as if it were filled with feathers. He gave me a reassuring nod, his intense expression softening into one of deep familial loyalty. "We are not going to let that happen, Nat. Let us get your things and get out of here. This house is a dead end, but we have a lot of work to do." We quickly loaded my remaining essential items, my delicate appraisal tools, and my extensive legal documents into the back of Jamal's spacious SUV. I did not look back at the beautiful house I had poured so much love and money into. I simply climbed into the passenger seat, letting the heavy doors close around me and block out the neighborhood. Sitting safely in the leather seat of Jamal's car, the sheer magnitude of the morning finally caught up to me. The calculated betrayal from Bradley, the vicious, unprovoked attack from his arrogant parents, the sudden terrifying realization that I was entirely untethered from the life I knew and the future I had planned. The tears I had fought so hard to hold back during the ugly confrontation finally broke free. I leaned my forehead against the cool glass of the passenger window and broke down completely silent sobs, shaking my entire body as the weight of my ruined marriage crushed me. The driver's side door opened and Jamal slid into the seat. He did not immediately start the engine. Instead, he reached into the center cup holder and handed me a steaming cup of coffee he must have bought on the fast drive over. The sudden warmth radiating from the thick paper cup grounded me, pulling me back from the edge of a total panic attack. I took a very shaky breath, wiping the tears from my cheeks with the back of my trembling hand. "I am so sorry," I whispered, staring down at the dark coffee. "I just feel so incredibly stupid. He played me for a fool, and now I have absolutely nothing left to fight back with." Jamal turned the key in the ignition. The powerful engine purred to life with a steady, reliable hum. He shifted the car into gear, looking straight ahead through the windshield, a dangerous, calculating smile slowly spreading across his face. "Save your tears, Nat," Jamal said, his voice ringing with absolute chilling certainty. "We are going hunting right now." 20 minutes later, Jamal pulled his SUV into the driveway of the spacious brick home he shared with my sister. Rachel immediately ushered me inside, wrapping a thick fleece blanket around my shoulders and pressing a mug of hot tea into my hands. She guided me toward the kitchen, but Jamal bypassed the living areas completely. He marched straight down the hallway and unlocked the heavy steel door to his home office. Jamal called it his workspace, but it looked like the command center of a federal intelligence agency. 4 massive curved monitors dominated the custom-built desk, their screens glowing with lines of complex code and encrypted security protocols. The room was constantly air-conditioned to keep the massive server racks cool, humming with a low, steady vibration that felt like the heartbeat of a digital fortress. He worked as a top-tier forensic tech investigator, spending his days tracking down corporate embezzlers and international cybercriminals for elite financial institutions. Today he was bringing that entire arsenal to bear on my arrogant, cheating husband. Jamal sat down in his ergonomic leather chair and held out his hand. "Give me the iPad, Nat." The one Bradley tossed in the junk drawer back in February when he bought himself the newest model. I reached into my heavy tote bag, digging past the frantic mess of tax returns and bank statements I had grabbed that morning. I pulled out the sleek silver tablet. The screen was cracked in the top corner, which was exactly why Bradley had discarded it. I handed the device to Jamal. Jamal connected the tablet to a complex-looking black hub on his desk. His fingers flew across his mechanical keyboard with blinding speed. He explained that amateur white-collar criminals always make the exact same arrogant mistakes. They believe that buying a basic commercial virtual private network and clearing their browser history makes them invisible. But digital footprints are like wet cement. If you step in it, you leave a permanent mold. Bradley thought he wiped this device clean before tossing it. Jamal said, his eyes scanning a rapid stream of data cascading down his far-left monitor. But he forgot that cloud synchronization protocols store localized cache data deep within the operational framework. "I am retrieving his deleted password keychains right now." I stood behind Jamal, watching the screens with bated breath while Rachel stood beside me, her hand resting reassuringly on my shoulder. Jamal explained the mechanics of offshore shell companies and hidden assets as he worked. He detailed how wealthy executives frequently attempt to bleed their marital accounts dry by fabricating massive corporate losses, filtering the money through a labyrinth of dummy corporations to make it look like legitimate business expenses. Bradley was trying to paint a very specific financial picture for the divorce courts, so he could walk away paying absolutely zero spousal support. "Got him?" Jamal announced, his voice carrying a sharp edge of triumph. He bypassed Bradley's rudimentary security firewalls in less than 10 minutes. A series of private emails and encrypted financial ledgers suddenly populated the center monitor. Jamal clicked open a highly confidential legal document stamped with the logo of a massive Silicon Valley conglomerate. It was a finalized acquisition contract. Bradley's tech startup was not failing at all. In fact, it was the exact opposite. The company had just been acquired in a highly lucrative silent buyout by an international tech giant. The deal had been kept strictly confidential under an ironclad non-disclosure agreement until the end of the fiscal quarter. Bradley had spent half a year lying to my face, playing the role of a stressed, struggling executive on the verge of total ruin, all while actively plotting to leave me with absolutely nothing. Jamal highlighted a specific clause buried deep on page 42 of the acquisition contract. Because Bradley was the chief financial officer who brokered the highly profitable merger, his employment contract guaranteed him a massive golden parachute. "There it is," Jamal said, pointing to a highlighted row of numbers. Bradley received a direct executive payout of exactly $3 million. I gasped, my hand flying to my mouth. $3 million. He had stolen the $150,000 from our joint savings account. not because he needed it to pay off imaginary debts, but because he was a greedy, vindictive monster who wanted to ensure I was left entirely destitute while he walked away a multimillionaire. He filed for divorce and handed me a 48-hour eviction notice precisely to rush the legal separation before this corporate buyout went public. He wanted to finalize the divorce while on paper he still looked completely broke. Rachel let out a sharp, angry breath. That absolute snake. He drained your savings to fund his new life with that 26-year-old assistant, and he hid $3 million to ensure you never saw a single dime of the wealth you helped him build. Jamal's fingers returned to the keyboard, moving with renewed aggressive purpose. If he received a $3 million payout, it has to be parked somewhere, Jamal muttered, his eyes narrowing as he traced the digital routing numbers through a maze of banking servers. He would not put it in a traditional offshore account. The federal tax penalties for undeclared international corporate payouts are too severe, and Bradley is far too cheap to pay those taxes. He is hiding it domestically. Lines of green code scrolled frantically across the right monitor as Jamal deployed a specialized tracing algorithm. He pulled up Bradley's hidden transaction logs. The room fell dead silent. Jamal hit the enter key one final time. A brightly colored bank statement popped onto the main screen displaying a massive, undeniable balance of exactly $3 million. I found the money, Jamal announced. He traced the routing numbers directly to the destination. Bradley parked all $3 million inside a domestic limited liability company right here in Illinois. I stared at the glowing screen, waiting to read the exact name of the mysterious corporation my soon-to-be ex-husband had used to hide his stolen wealth. I stared at the glowing screen, waiting to read the exact name of the mysterious corporation my soon-to-be ex-husband had used to hide his stolen wealth. Jamal typed a few quick commands into his terminal, bridging the banking routing numbers directly with the Illinois Secretary of State Business Registry. A thick progress bar flashed briefly across the monitor before the official corporate filing loaded into view. The stark black text against the bright white background of the government database illuminated the dark room. The registered entity holding the $3 million payout was listed as Nova Holdings, LLC. I stopped breathing entirely. My eyes locked onto those three specific words, and the entire room seemed to suddenly drop in temperature. A profound, freezing shock washed over my skin instantly, followed by a massive, boiling surge of pure adrenaline. The blood rushed to my ears, pounding with a heavy, rhythmic intensity that drowned out the steady hum of Jamal's server racks. Rachel leaned closer to the monitor, her brow furrowed in deep confusion. She looked back and forth between Jamal and me. "What is Nova Holdings?" she asked, her voice tinged with impatience and worry. "Is that one of the subsidiary companies his tech startup owns?" I slowly shook my head, completely unable to break my gaze away from the bright monitor. I gripped the edge of Jamal's heavy wooden desk, my fingernails digging into the smooth surface as a dangerous, hysterical laugh threatened to tear its way out of my throat. "It is not his company," I whispered, the brilliant reality of the situation slowly cementing itself in my brain. "It is mine." Jamal spun his ergonomic chair around to face me, his sharp eyes widening in sudden, intense realization. "What exactly do you mean it is yours, Nat?" 2 weeks of absolute silence and meticulous preparation led me directly into the polished, aggressively sterile environment of a top-tier Chicago law firm. The massive glass doors of the building slid open, welcoming me into a lobby that smelled of expensive leather and corporate intimidation. I rode the silent elevator up to the 45th floor, watching the city skyline shrink beneath me. I had chosen my outfit with extreme care. I wore a simple, understated beige suit that looked distinctly off the rack, completely devoid of any luxury branding. I had carefully applied my makeup to look utterly exhausted, highlighting the dark circles under my eyes. I needed to project the exact image of a defeated, broken woman that my husband desperately expected to see. When the receptionist guided me through the heavy glass doors of the primary conference room, Bradley was already sitting across the massive mahogany table. He exuded an aura of overwhelming wealthy arrogance. He wore a brand new custom-tailored charcoal suit, and his posture was relaxed, bordering on bored. A heavy luxury watch flashed against his wrist under the recessed lighting. He certainly did not look like a desperate executive facing total corporate bankruptcy. He looked like a king preparing to effortlessly execute a peasant. Sitting right beside him was his high-priced shark of a divorce attorney, a sharp-featured man named Richard Blackwood, whose entire career was built on dismantling vulnerable spouses for wealthy corporate clients. I took my seat slowly opposite them, folding my trembling hands in my lap to expertly hide the steady, calculated calm coursing through my veins. Mr. Blackwood did not waste a single second with pleasantries or basic human empathy. He opened a thick, genuine leather binder and slid a bound stack of dense legal documents across the polished mahogany surface. The heavy papers stopped right in front of me with a soft thud. Mr. Blackwood steepled his fingers, adopting a tone of deep, entirely manufactured sympathy. He smoothly explained that a prolonged legal battle would be utterly devastating for both parties, but particularly ruinous for me, given my lack of steady, high-income employment. He effortlessly reiterated the massive lie Bradley had meticulously constructed over the past months. The lawyer claimed that Bradley's tech startup was completely underwater, drowning in aggressive corporate debt, and that the marital assets had to be liquidated immediately simply to satisfy angry creditors and prevent prosecution. Because of this fabricated financial catastrophe, Mr. Blackwood stated that Bradley was willing to absorb the entirety of the crushing corporate debt. In exchange, Bradley would retain sole ownership of the heavily leveraged suburban house, the two luxury vehicles, and his completely worthless startup shares. Bradley leaned back in his plush leather chair, casually crossing his arms over his chest. He looked at me with a sickening mixture of performative pity and extreme superiority. He told me he knew the sudden transition would be tough on me. He said he remembered the good years we shared and wanted to ensure I did not end up sleeping on the freezing streets of downtown Chicago. At that exact cue, Mr. Blackwood reached into his tailored jacket pocket and pulled out a certified cashier's check. He placed it deliberately on top of the settlement agreement, making sure the numbers faced me. The amount written on the crisp paper was exactly $10,000. Bradley graciously offered this pathetic one-time payout as a complete and final settlement. He called it a generous parting gift to help me secure a tiny, modest apartment and cover my basic living expenses while I desperately tried to rebuild my dusty little appraisal career from scratch. I stared down at the printed check, maintaining my rigid mask of absolute devastation. $10,000. It was a microscopic fraction of the $150,000 he had stolen directly from my life savings, and an absolute joke compared to the $3 million he was currently hiding. The sheer audacity of his insulting offer was staggering. He was tossing me pocket change while fully intending to walk away with a massive secret fortune. Mr. Blackwood continued his aggressive sales pitch, attempting to corner me. He warned me in a low, dangerous tone that if I refused to sign this generous settlement today, his firm would file immediate, relentless motions to drag this divorce out for years. He threatened to bury me under an avalanche of legal paperwork, forcing me to hire costly forensic accountants and financial investigators that I clearly could not afford. Every single word out of his mouth was expertly designed to intimidate, to bully, and to force a rapid, unquestioning surrender. Bradley watched me intently, clearly enjoying my sustained silence. He mistook my quiet, analytical calculation for crushing despair. Then Bradley leaned forward, resting his elbows on the cool mahogany table. He adopted a tone of magnanimous sacrifice. He told me there was one more minor, annoying detail we needed to address before finalizing the paperwork. He brought up Nova Holdings, LLC. He acted as if the name barely crossed his mind, waving his hand dismissively as though swatting away a pesky fly. He reminded me of the small, failed antique restoration business I had tried to launch 5 years ago. He spoke to me slowly, his voice dripping with heavy condescension, explaining that corporate entities carry lingering, dangerous liabilities. According to Bradley's fabricated narrative that Dormant LLC was currently burdened with years of unpaid state franchise fees and complicated back taxes that I had foolishly neglected to file. He claimed the State Revenue Board was preparing to issue aggressive financial penalties against the corporate entity. Mr. Blackwood flipped to the final page of the settlement agreement and tapped a specific highlighted clause with his expensive gold pen. Bradley put on his absolute most convincing mask of a benevolent savior. He told me that because he still cared about my future, he was willing to do me one last massive favor. He insisted that I take full 100% legal ownership and total liability of Nova Holdings, LLC. He said he was simply too kind to make me split the supposed tax burden, claiming he wanted to give me a clean break. By transferring the entirety of the corporate structure solely into my name, he claimed he was streamlining the divorce process and protecting his own fragile credit score from my terrible business mistakes. In reality, he was desperately trying to sever his own legal ties to the shell company currently holding his stolen $3 million. He needed the money to remain completely hidden from the divorce courts under my tax identification number, assuming he could easily maintain secret, untraceable access to the external bank accounts once the ink dried. I looked down at the thick stack of divorce papers resting on the mahogany table. I let a perfectly timed, shaky breath escape my lips, ensuring the sound was audible in the quiet room. I reached up with a trembling hand and wiped a fake tear from the corner of my eye, playing the role of the defeated, broken wife to absolute flawless perfection. I slowly reached out and picked up the heavy gold pen Mr. Blackwood offered me. I held the critical document in my hands, my eyes aimlessly scanning the dense legal jargon, as if I were struggling to comprehend my own ruin. I hesitated, letting the tense silence stretch tightly across the glass-walled room. Bradley shifted impatiently in his expensive chair, his eyes locked greedily onto the gold pen in my hand. He thought he had won the ultimate game. I kept my head bowed low, pretending to read the final liability clause, while internally I was screaming with pure, unadulterated joy at his colossal, irreversible stupidity. I took a deep, shuddering breath, forcing my racing mind to process the sheer magnitude of my husband's catastrophic error. 5 years ago, long before my career at the appraisal firm really took off, I wanted to start a specialized side business. I planned to acquire damaged, high-value antique furniture at estate sales, meticulously restore the pieces in my garage, and flip them to wealthy collectors. I went through all the proper legal channels to do everything completely by the book. I paid the expensive state filing fees, registered a limited liability company, and secured a federal employer identification number. I proudly named the business Nova Holdings, LLC. I remembered the exact night I proudly showed the official corporate paperwork to Bradley. I genuinely thought he would be thrilled by my entrepreneurial spirit and my drive to bring more money into our household. Instead, he brutally mocked the entire concept. He laughed right in my face, calling it a pathetic, dusty little hobby that would only drain our limited resources. He told me to stop playing business owner and focus on bringing in a steady paycheck to support his grand executive ambitions. His cruel, condescending dismissal crushed my confidence so thoroughly that I boxed up the paperwork, shoved it deep into the back of our home office filing cabinet, and completely abandoned the project. The company remained entirely dormant, a hollow corporate shell sitting completely inactive for half a decade. Jamal let out a low, deeply impressed whistle. He turned back to his monitors, his fingers flying across the mechanical keyboard with renewed aggressive vigor. He began pulling up the historical state filings and the linked commercial banking mandates for the LLC. Bradley is a chief financial officer. Jamal explained, his voice laced with a mixture of professional disgust and utter amusement. He deeply understands high-level corporate finance, but he is also incredibly cheap and dangerously arrogant. Setting up a bulletproof offshore account or a completely anonymous domestic shell company takes a significant amount of time and effort. It requires paying hefty retainer fees to specialized corporate lawyers, hiring nominee directors to hide the true ownership, and navigating mountains of strict federal banking regulations. Rachel gasped, a sharp realization dawning on her face. He did not want to spend the money or leave a paper trail with a new law firm. Exactly, Jamal confirmed, highlighting a specific line of encrypted data on his screen. Why pay thousands of dollars and risk exposure when there is a perfectly clean, legally aged corporate entity sitting dormant right inside your own home filing cabinet? An aged LLC is incredibly valuable when you need to move large sums of money quickly without triggering automated banking suspicion or IRS audits. Bradley simply hijacked your dormant tax ID. He updated the mailing addresses to a private commercial post office box and routed the corporate buyout funds directly into a new commercial bank account opened under the Nova Holdings umbrella. He thought I was stupid, I said, my voice growing colder and sharper with every passing second. He thought I was just some oblivious small-town appraiser who did not understand how corporate financial structures worked. He assumed I had completely forgotten about the paperwork and would never possess the technical capacity to uncover a hidden commercial bank account. His massive ego convinced him he was untouchable. Jamal pulled up the original articles of organization and the most recent annual reports filed with the state of Illinois. He magnified the high-resolution documents and pointed directly to the primary ownership declarations. Here is the absolute most beautiful part of his entire arrogant scheme, Jamal said, a slow, predatory smile spreading across his face. Changing the legal ownership of an established LLC requires filing specific structural amendments with the state registry. Most importantly, it requires the notarized signature of the original registered agent. Bradley could not remove your name from the state documentation without alerting you to the deception. He just operated entirely in the shadows, hoping to finalize your divorce and walk away completely free long before the state tax authorities ever sent a notice to your old residential address. Jamal leaned back in his heavy leather chair and looked directly into my eyes. The danger and sheer excitement radiating from his expression mirrored the absolute fire currently burning in my own chest. The crushed, devastated woman, who had been weeping in his passenger seat an hour ago, was entirely gone. In her place stood a woman holding the ultimate weapon. Nat Jamal said, his voice dropping into a tone of absolute chilling certainty. By the strict letter of the law, you are the registered agent, the managing member, and the 100% sole proprietor of Nova Holdings LLC. Bradley is not listed on any of the foundational ownership documents. That means the $3 million corporate buyout payout legally belongs to the corporation. He paused, letting the spectacular weight of his words hang heavily in the cool, air-conditioned air of the server room. And the corporation legally belongs entirely to you. Your cheating, arrogant husband did not just steal your life savings. He just deposited $3 million directly into your bank account. The heavy glass door to the conference room opened with a soft, expensive-sounding click. Sloane slipped inside, carrying a stack of entirely unnecessary legal folders. She was playing her fabricated role as a paralegal today, wearing a tailored crimson skirt suit that screamed high-end boutique. Her massive diamond tennis necklace was conspicuously absent, replaced by a delicate gold chain to maintain the illusion of a struggling corporate office. She leaned over Bradley's shoulder, whispering something into his ear that made his lips curl into a vicious smirk. Then she walked slowly around the wide mahogany table, her designer heels clicking rhythmically against the hardwood floor. She stopped right beside my chair, pretending to arrange the settlement documents scattered in front of me. The overwhelming, suffocating scent of her expensive floral perfume invaded my lungs. She leaned down, bringing her face mere inches from mine. Her voice dropped to a venomous, hushed whisper meant solely for my ears. She told me I should take the pathetic $10,000 and run. She sneered, her breath hot against my cheek, calling me an ugly, aging appraiser who had completely lost her touch. She hissed that weak, ordinary women like me simply do not survive on their own in a ruthless city like Chicago. She told me to swallow whatever microscopic shred of pride I had left, grab the financial scraps they were generously tossing my way, and vanish before they decided to take the check off the table entirely. I kept my eyes fixed firmly on the paper, biting the inside of my cheek hard enough to draw blood. I needed physical pain to stop the triumphant, predatory smile from breaking through my carefully constructed mask of sorrow. Her petty insults meant absolutely nothing. They were just pure fuel adding to the absolute inferno burning inside my chest. Bradley noticed the brief exchange and decided it was the perfect time to snap the trap completely shut. He sat forward, dropping his benevolent savior act in a fraction of a second. His tone shifted into an aggressive, unyielding barrage of pure psychological warfare. He slammed his hand flat against the table, the sharp noise designed to make me jump. He laid out exactly what would happen if I refused to sign the documents sitting between us. He threatened that if I dared to fight this settlement in court, his high-priced legal team would completely drown me in endless, suffocating motions. He promised to drag the divorce proceedings out for years, burying me in so much manufactured corporate litigation that I would go entirely bankrupt just trying to pay retainers for defense attorneys I clearly could not afford. He painted a vivid, terrifying picture, describing in graphic detail how he would systematically dismantle my entire existence until I was living in a damp cardboard box under a downtown overpass. Mr. Blackwood sat perfectly still, nodding in silent agreement, professionally reinforcing the terrifying weight of Bradley's threats. Bradley pointed a rigid, angry finger at the specific clause regarding Nova Holdings LLC. He demanded that I sign over the rights and accept total liability immediately. He insisted that I formally waive all claims to spousal support, all requests for alimony, and any future earnings he might acquire. He framed this extortion as my one and only escape route, the singular financial lifeline that would keep me out of total, irreversible bankruptcy. He pushed the heavy gold pen closer to my trembling fingers, his eyes blazing with impatient greed. He needed me to take legal ownership of that dormant shell company. He desperately needed me to become the unwitting shield for his stolen $3 million, and he was willing to utterly terrorize me to ensure I complied. Every single instinct screaming in my body urged me to slam my fists onto the mahogany table to shout the truth and to wipe that arrogant, entitled smirk right off his face. But Jamal had explicitly warned me about this exact moment. He had given me strict, unwavering instructions the night before. I had to let Bradley believe he possessed absolute power. I had to make him feel like an untouchable god, completely drunk on his own perceived superiority. So I dug deep into my soul and delivered the acting masterclass of my entire life. I let my hands shake violently, the heavy gold pen rattling audibly against the polished wood of the conference table. I drew in a ragged, uneven breath, making my shoulders hitch, as if I were struggling to hold back a massive flood of absolute despair. I forced a single perfect tear to well up in my eye and spill over my lower lashes, tracing a slow, pathetic path down my pale cheek. I looked up at Bradley, making my eyes wide and pleading. I actively begged him to please reconsider taking the house. I reminded him of the beautiful garden we planted together, the warm holidays we spent by that fireplace, the family and the future we had so carefully planned. I let my voice crack pitifully, begging him not to throw me out onto the street with nothing but a worthless, debt-ridden company and a fraction of our savings. I asked how he could be so exceptionally cruel after a decade of loyal marriage. I played the shattered, helpless, discarded victim so flawlessly that even the stone-cold divorce attorney momentarily shifted his gaze away in obvious discomfort. My tearful, desperate display was the ultimate validation Bradley so deeply craved. He did not feel a single ounce of remorse. He did not feel a microscopic pang of guilt for destroying the woman who had sacrificed everything to build his career. Instead, he threw his head back and laughed. It was a cruel, booming, victorious sound that bounced aggressively off the glass walls of the conference room. He looked at me with absolute, unfiltered disgust, shaking his head. He told me I was pathetic. He leaned heavily across the wide table, invading my personal space, his eyes entirely devoid of any human empathy. He told me there was absolutely no room for weak, nostalgic losers in his grand future. He reached out, tapped his manicured finger sharply against the signature line at the bottom of the Nova Holdings transfer agreement, and issued his final command. "Sign the paper!" Natalie Bradley ordered, his voice echoing harshly off the glass walls of the sterile conference room. He tapped the thick parchment one last time, completely unaware that he was directing me to secure my own financial empire. I let out a jagged, broken breath that echoed pitifully across the wide mahogany table. My fingers hovered over the heavy gold pen. I made sure my hand shook violently enough for Mr. Blackwood to notice. The high-priced attorney shifted in his expensive leather chair, looking mildly uncomfortable with my highly theatrical display of utter defeat. But Bradley simply leaned forward, his eyes burning with toxic impatience and aggressive greed. I lowered my gaze to the final page of the settlement agreement. The words swam before my eyes, not from tears, but from the sheer overwhelming surge of adrenaline pumping rapidly through my veins. The specific clause was laid out in undeniable, rock-solid legal terminology. It explicitly stated that I, Natalie, accepted 100% sole ownership, complete liability, and total proprietary control of Nova Holdings, LLC. It also included an ironclad waiver, where I formally surrendered any and all claims to Bradley's future earnings, his corporate bonuses, and his startup shares. I was legally severing myself from his fabricated financial ruin. I gripped the gold pen so tightly my knuckles turned stark white against my pale skin. I pressed the sharp nib against the thick paper. I let out a soft, defeated sob, a sound so perfectly pathetic it belonged on a theatrical stage. I dragged the pen across the designated signature line, carefully writing out my full name. I crossed the T and dotted the I, feeling the permanent transfer of power flowing straight from the dark ink directly into the document. I signed the secondary waiver, officially relinquishing any right to ever pursue his business assets. I signed the property forfeiture, formally giving up the suburban house that I already knew was drowning in toxic fabricated debt. With every deliberate stroke of the pen, I was entirely cutting away the dead weight of my deceptive husband. I pushed the signed document slowly across the polished wood table. My shoulders slumped forward, presenting the flawless, tragic image of a woman who had just signed her own death warrant. Mr. Blackwood immediately snatched the papers up from the table. He scanned my signatures with predatory speed, ensuring every single line was properly executed and legally binding. He nodded curtly to the certified mediator sitting quietly at the far end of the room. The mediator, a stern woman in a tailored gray suit, pulled her official embosser from her sleek briefcase. She looked directly at me and asked me to formally confirm that I was signing these binding documents under my own free will, without any physical duress or coercion. I looked up at Bradley. He was staring at me with a cold, hollow intensity, silently threatening me to finish the process without causing any further delays. I looked back at the mediator and nodded my head slowly, whispering a quiet, broken yes. She picked up her heavy metal stamp. The sharp sound of the embosser clamping down hard on the thick paper was like a starting gun going off in my mind. She applied her official raised seal, pressed her black ink stamp firmly over the dates, and signed her own name boldly across the notary line. It was done. The settlement was completely finalized. The transfer of Nova Holdings, LLC, was now a binding, irreversible legal contract fully recognized by the state. Across the table, the heavy tension instantly evaporated from Bradley's shoulders. He exhaled a long, deeply satisfied breath, dropping his aggressive posture. He turned his head slightly and locked eyes with Sloane. The young assistant offered him a wicked, triumphant smirk, her eyes gleaming brightly with the promise of the massive hidden fortune they believed they had just successfully secured. Bradley reached under the table, clearly taking Sloane's hand in a gesture of shared victory. He truly believed he had executed the perfect corporate crime. He honestly thought he had just dumped a worthless, debt-ridden shell company onto his gullible wife while safely burying his $3 million golden parachute far away from the reach of the divorce court. He thought he had completely ruined my entire life. He thought I was leaving this room with absolutely nothing but a $10,000 cashier's check and a mountain of fabricated corporate liabilities. He was so blindingly arrogant that he never once considered checking the digital locks on the financial vault he had built. Mr. Blackwood separated the copies of the finalized agreement with crisp, efficient movements. He slid a thin manila folder containing my designated copies across the table, placing the cashier's check neatly on the very top. He offered a brief, entirely insincere apology for how things turned out, wishing me the best of luck in my future endeavors. I did not respond to his hollow pleasantries. I slowly reached out and gathered my documents. I kept my chin tucked tightly down to my chest, letting my hair fall forward to completely shield my face from their view. I desperately needed the physical barrier, because I could no longer maintain the illusion of devastating sorrow. A fierce, predatory smile was aggressively tearing its way across my face, pulling at the corners of my mouth. My heart was hammering a violent, victorious rhythm against my ribs. I carefully placed the documents and the pathetic check into my leather tote bag, securing the clasp. I pushed my chair back and stood up. My legs felt incredibly strong, thoroughly energized by the spectacular reality of what had just transpired. Bradley remained seated, leaning back casually, with his hands clasped behind his head. He watched me prepare to leave, his expression radiating absolute unchecked arrogance. He did not say a single word of farewell, believing I was entirely beneath his notice now. Sloane let out a soft, dismissive scoff as I turned my back on them. I walked toward the heavy glass doors of the conference room, my posture shifting subtly with every single step. The slumped, defeated victim dissolved instantly. I pushed the doors open and stepped out into the quiet, carpeted hallway of the law firm. I gripped the strap of my tote bag tightly, feeling the physical weight of the papers inside. I marched straight down the long corridor toward the elevator bank. My heels clicked with sharp, undeniable authority against the marble floors. I pressed the call button and watched the metallic doors slide open. I stepped inside the empty elevator and turned around to watch the law office disappear from view. I clutched my leather bag against my chest, holding on to the notarized irreversible contract that had just officially made me a multimillionaire. The elevator descended rapidly, leaving the 45th floor, and my old life completely behind. I watched the digital floor numbers count down, feeling the heavy, suffocating pressure of Bradley's psychological warfare completely evaporate from my shoulders. The tight, pathetic posture I had maintained for the last hour vanished entirely. I stood up straight, rolled my shoulders back, and let out a long, genuine breath of pure relief. I had actually done it. I had sat in the lion's den, played the perfect, devastated victim, and walked out with the absolute keys to the kingdom. The polished metal doors slid open at the lobby level, and I strode out into the bustling atrium of the commercial skyscraper. I pushed through the heavy revolving doors and stepped directly onto the busy Chicago pavement. The crisp, biting afternoon wind whipped across my face, but I did not shiver. The sheer adrenaline coursing through my veins kept me entirely warm. I joined the rapid flow of pedestrian traffic, melting into the anonymous crowd of business professionals and tourists. I had barely made it half a block down the bustling avenue when a sharp vibration against my hip commanded my attention. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out my phone, the screen illuminated brightly against the overcast sky. A new message notification sat right on the lock screen. The sender was listed simply as Bradley. I swiped the notification to open the text thread. Bradley could not resist getting one final vicious dig in. He needed the absolute last word to satisfy his massive, fragile ego. His message was short, arrogant, and dripping with manufactured superiority. It read, "Good luck surviving on 10 grand. Take care of yourself, loser." I stopped walking, stepping out of the flow of foot traffic to lean against the cold stone facade of a nearby bank building. I stared down at the harsh, glowing letters on my screen. An hour ago, a message like that would have sent me into a total panic spiral. It was designed to crush my spirit, to remind me of my newly impoverished status, and to reassert his ultimate dominance over my entire existence. He wanted me to feel the terrifying weight of my impending homelessness while he drove off to his luxury hotel suite with his 26-year-old mistress. He wanted me to break. I did not type out an angry reply. I did not hurl insults or tell him he was a monster. Engaging with his toxic bait would completely ruin the execution of our master plan. Instead, I opened my leather tote bag and reached past the pathetic $10,000 cashier's check. My fingers found the crisp edge of the thick manila folder holding my designated copies of the finalized settlement agreement. I pulled the stack of legal documents out into the daylight. I flipped directly to the final page, smoothing it flat against my purse. The heavy black ink of Bradley's signature stood out starkly against the white paper. Right next to it, the raised seal and the dark stamp of the certified mediator confirmed the absolute irreversible legality of the contract. I opened the camera application on my phone. I carefully framed the shot, ensuring the lighting was perfect, and every single word of the liability transfer clause was entirely legible in the high-resolution image. I pressed the shutter button, capturing the exact moment Bradley unknowingly signed away a $3 million fortune. I opened my encrypted messaging application and attached the crystal-clear photograph to a new text thread. The recipient was my brother-in-law, Jamal. I took a deep, steadying breath, feeling the spectacular weight of the moment settling into my bones. The entire trap we had spent the last 2 weeks meticulously designing had finally snapped shut. I typed out a swift, decisive message to accompany the photographic evidence of our victory. My message to Jamal was brief and carried the weight of absolute finality. The trap is locked. He signed it all away. Activate the protocol. I hit the send icon and watched the tiny digital arrow fly across the screen. I stood there on the busy Chicago sidewalk, clutching the heavy legal documents against my chest, completely ignoring the noise of the city traffic roaring past me. I waited for Jamal to confirm receipt. I knew exactly what he was doing at this precise moment. He was sitting in his temperature-controlled home office surrounded by his massive array of glowing monitors, fully prepared to deploy the digital payload we had carefully constructed. Less than 30 seconds later, my screen lit up with an incoming reply. Jamal did not send a long, celebratory paragraph. He did not ask for any further clarification or express any lingering doubt. He simply responded with a single, highly satisfying thumbs-up emoji. The visual confirmation was all I needed to know. The operation was officially live. Miles away in the quiet suburbs, Jamal's fingers were already flying across his mechanical keyboard at blinding speed. Armed with the high-resolution photograph of the legally binding notarized settlement agreement, he possessed the ultimate key to the digital vault. He bypassed the preliminary banking firewalls and uploaded the certified documentation directly into the secure commercial banking portal assigned to Nova Holdings, LLC. The legal paperwork provided indisputable proof that I was the 100% sole proprietor and managing member of the corporate entity. With a few rapid, aggressive keystrokes, Jamal submitted the formalized change of control request to the financial institution. He systematically revoked every single trace of unauthorized access linked to the account. He purged Bradley's hidden email addresses from the recovery protocols. He deleted Sloane's phone number from the two-factor authentication system. He changed the primary master passwords, fortified the encryption keys, and rerouted the automated security alerts directly to my personal devices. In the span of a few highly coordinated minutes, the intricate digital architecture Jamal deployed went into full, irreversible effect. The heavy steel doors of the banking servers slammed completely shut. Bradley was now entirely locked out of the external commercial accounts, holding his stolen $3 million golden parachute. He had absolutely zero legal standing to reclaim the funds, and any attempt to breach the system would instantly flag federal authorities. The trap was executed flawlessly, leaving my arrogant husband utterly powerless. Bradley had fully expected me to dissolve into a pathetic puddle of weeping panic the absolute second I stepped out of that sterile conference room. He had eagerly anticipated a desperate, sobbing phone call begging for my old life back, pleading for him to return the house and the savings he had so ruthlessly stolen. When his phone remained completely silent throughout the evening, his toxic, fragile ego simply could not handle the quiet. My lack of surrender infuriated him. His absolute driving need to break my spirit pushed him to deliver one final devastating blow. He decided to strategically target the only remaining pillar of independence I had left to my name: my career. As a highly paid chief financial officer for a heavily backed tech company, Bradley ran in the exact same elite social circles as the wealthy art dealers, private collectors, and auction house directors in downtown Chicago. He knew exactly who to call to inflict maximum professional damage. Early the next morning, while sitting in his luxury penthouse suite with his mistress, he dialed the senior managing partner at my appraisal firm. The partner was a rigid old money executive named Mr. Montgomery, a man who valued scandal-free discretion above all else. Bradley put on a masterclass performance of a deeply concerned, heartbroken, soon-to-be ex-husband. He fabricated a vicious, elaborate lie telling Mr. Montgomery that our marriage was abruptly ending because I was embroiled in severe, highly illegal financial fraud. He explicitly claimed I had secretly accumulated hundreds of thousands of dollars in hidden gambling debt and was currently under active investigation by federal tax authorities. Bradley intentionally planted a highly radioactive seed of doubt in Mr. Montgomery's mind. He suggested with manufactured hesitation and a perfectly timed sigh that a woman drowning in that much desperate, unmanageable debt simply could not be trusted alone in a vault filled with priceless antiquities. He heavily implied I was a massive liability, who might quietly slip a valuable artifact into my purse to quickly pay off my imaginary aggressive creditors. Totally unaware of the brutal sabotage orchestrated behind my back, I arrived at work feeling absolutely invincible. The knowledge that I was legally sitting on a $3 million fortune had given me an entirely new level of unshakable confidence. It was the morning of the prestigious Autumn Gala, the single most important and lucrative estate auction our firm hosted all year. Wealthy collectors and international investors were flying into Chicago from all over the world to bid on exclusive, highly curated pieces. The main gallery was a spectacular hive of nervous, excited energy filled with the rich scent of expensive floor polish, catered espresso, and fresh floral arrangements. I was dressed in a sharp, professional black suit, fully prepared to lead the floor appraisals and manage the high net worth bidders. I walked confidently toward the main registration desk to pick up my official bidding paddle and employee credentials. Instead of handing me my badge with her usual cheerful greeting, the receptionist cast her eyes downward, actively refusing to make eye contact with me. She quietly told me that the senior partners requested my immediate presence in the executive suite on the top floor. I walked into the corner office expecting a last-minute briefing on the auction catalog or a change in the bidding schedule. Instead, I found Mr. Montgomery standing rigidly behind his massive oak desk, flanked tightly by the head of building security. The atmosphere in the room was suffocatingly hostile and freezing cold. Mr. Montgomery did not offer me a seat. He looked at me with cold, unforgiving judgment, viewing me not as his top appraiser, but as an immediate corporate threat. He formally informed me that the firm had received a deeply troubling phone call from a prominent corporate executive regarding my current financial instability and moral character. My stomach plummeted violently as the immediate realization hit me. Bradley had struck again. I tried to defend myself, stepping forward and insisting that my soon-to-be ex-husband was lying out of sheer vindictiveness during a bitter divorce, but Mr. Montgomery held up a hand to aggressively silence me. He stated that in the high-stakes world of luxury estate appraisals, reputation and absolute trust are everything. He firmly declared that the firm simply could not risk a public scandal or afford even a fraction of a shadow of a doubt regarding the integrity of their staff. Without allowing me to present a single piece of evidence to clear my name, Mr. Montgomery demanded my security keycard and my corporate bidding paddle. He officially stripped me of my floor duties and placed me on immediate, indefinite, unpaid suspension due to severe character concerns. He then instructed the massive security director to escort me directly off the premises to ensure I did not wander near the holding vaults on my way out. The profound humiliation burned hot and fast through my veins. The security guard walked me closely down the main corridor, treating me exactly like a common criminal. I had to walk past my junior colleagues who stopped what they were doing and turned their heads to whisper frantically as I was marched toward the main exit. 10 years of flawless, dedicated service to this firm, years of generating millions in revenue through my expert authentications, had been completely erased by one malicious phone call from a vindictive man who wanted to see me broken. I finally reached the grand marble lobby, my cheeks burning with intense embarrassment. The heavy glass revolving doors stood right in front of me, offering an immediate exit back into the cold, anonymous city streets. I adjusted my tight grip on my purse, fully prepared to push through the glass called Jamal and initiate a massive scorched earth defamation lawsuit against Bradley. But as I took my very final step toward the exit, a sudden explosive commotion erupted from the VIP viewing gallery, situated directly off the main lobby. The heavy oak doors to the gallery flew open with a violent, echoing crash. A booming, furious voice echoed across the pristine marble floors, instantly stopping everyone in the lobby in their tracks. It was Winston Harrington, one of the most prominent, wealthy, and ruthless billionaire art collectors in the entire Midwest. He was shouting aggressively at two of the firm's senior male appraisers, his face a deep shade of purple, with absolute unfiltered outrage. He was demanding a full immediate retraction of his opening bid, loudly declaring to the entire room that the absolute crown jewel of today's prestigious auction, a highly anticipated multi-million-dollar 18th-century French landscape painting, was a complete and utter forgery. I froze completely in my tracks, letting the revolving doors spin empty without me. Winston Harrington was not a man who made empty threats. He was an absolute titan of Chicago real estate and a notoriously aggressive collector who had single-handedly financed the modern wing of the City Art Museum. His furious voice echoed violently off the high marble ceilings, completely drowning out the ambient classical music playing softly in the main lobby. He pointed a thick, accusatory finger directly at the massive canvas resting on the velvet-draped easel in the center of the viewing room. He roared that the brushwork in the upper left quadrant looked completely wrong for an 18th-century French master. He loudly declared to the entire room that he felt an intuitive, sickening sense of modern artificiality radiating from the piece. The two senior male appraisers men, who had gladly nodded along with my unjust suspension just 20 minutes ago, were visibly sweating through their expensive tailored suits. They stuttered and stammered, desperately trying to pacify the enraged billionaire by pointing with trembling fingers to the extensive, seemingly flawless provenance documents stacked neatly on the display table. They lacked the technical expertise to actually analyze the physical paint under extreme pressure, relying entirely on the paperwork they had blindly accepted. The entire auction was on the absolute brink of total, catastrophic failure. If Winston pulled his opening bid and publicly declared the crown jewel a fake, it would trigger a massive, irreversible panic. Every other wealthy buyer in the building would immediately withdraw their funds. The firm would lose tens of millions of dollars in commissions and face total industry ruin. I watched the disastrous scene unfolding from the lobby, my massive security escort still standing awkwardly right beside me. My heart hammered aggressively against my ribs. I had been brutally humiliated, stripped of my hard-earned title, and marched to the door like a common criminal based entirely on Bradley's vindictive lies. Logic dictated that I should walk out into the cold Chicago afternoon and let the arrogant men who had just fired me completely burn in the fires of their own sheer incompetence. But the appraiser inside me, the dedicated professional who had spent over a decade training her eye to spot the microscopic differences between truth and deception, simply could not walk away from a tainted canvas. I spun around on my heel, my adrenaline surging. The head of building security immediately reached out to grab my arm, warning me in a low, threatening tone that I was officially trespassing. I looked him dead in the eye. With a gaze so fiercely intimidating, he actually took a physical step backward. I told him to take his hand off me right now, unless he personally wanted to explain to the managing partners why he allowed a $50 million auction to collapse into ashes. He hesitated for a critical fraction of a second. That was all the time I needed. I pushed hard past the heavy security doors and marched straight back into the chaotic VIP viewing room. The room went completely dead silent as I stepped confidently up to the thick velvet ropes. The senior appraiser, who had eagerly taken my position, hissed at me to leave the premises immediately, warning me that I was making a pathetic fool of myself. I completely ignored his desperate attempt to maintain his crumbling authority. I walked directly past him to the specialized equipment cart resting in the far corner of the gallery. I reached into the sterile drawers and grabbed my personal magnifying loupe and a high-powered ultraviolet inspection flashlight. Winston Harrington stopped his aggressive shouting and glared down at me, his massive arms crossed tightly over his chest. He demanded to know who I was and why I was interrupting his demand for a massive refund. I did not offer him a polite, submissive customer service smile. I looked the furious billionaire straight in his eyes and introduced myself as the only person in the entire building possessing the actual technical skills required to prove whether he was looking at a priceless masterpiece or a worthless piece of garbage. I stepped directly up to the controversial canvas, turning my back entirely to the stunned crowd of wealthy investors and panicked firm executives. I slipped the magnifying loupe over my right eye and clicked on the heavy ultraviolet flashlight. The entire room held its collective breath. The chaotic noise of the auction house faded away entirely, replaced by the hyper-focused, deeply familiar tunnel vision of my profession. I slowly ran the intense purple beam of the UV light over the heavy textured layers of oil paint. Under ultraviolet illumination, genuine 18th century pigments react in highly specific, chemically predictable ways. Old varnishes fluoresce with a distinct cloudy greenish-yellow glow, while newer retouches appear as dark, solid spots absorbing the light. The lower half of the landscape, featuring a dark, brooding forest and a muddy river, glowed with the perfect, authentic, cloudy resonance of a true historical artifact. But when I swept the beam upward into the bright, fluffy white clouds dominating the top left quadrant of the painting, the chemical reaction shifted violently. The specific fluorescence was entirely wrong. I leaned in closer, my face mere inches from the canvas, letting the magnifying loupe isolate the individual microscopic brushstrokes. I analyzed the specific crazing patterns in the dried paint, looking for the telltale signs of artificial aging. I switched off the UV light and turned back to face the completely silent room. I looked directly at the senior appraisers, who were trembling with visible fear. I announced in a crisp, unwavering voice that Winston Harrington was absolutely correct. The painting was a brilliant, highly sophisticated forgery, but not a modern one. It was a 19th century composite. I pointed directly to the thick white clouds painted in the upper corner of the heavy canvas. I explained that while the bottom half of the painting utilized historically accurate lead white pigment, the artist who painted the clouds had used zinc white. I kept my tone clinical and utterly devastating, detailing the precise chemical history of fine art materials. I informed the room that zinc white paint was not commercially invented or available to artists until the year 1834, more than 50 years after this specific painting was supposedly completed by the original master. I explained that a highly skilled 19th century forger had taken an unfinished, genuinely old canvas and completed the sky themselves unknowingly, leaving behind a chemical anachronism that entirely destroyed the piece's authenticity. The expensive provenance documents sitting on the display table were nothing but an elaborate, well-funded lie designed to obscure the scientific truth hiding right there on the canvas. The senior appraiser opened his mouth to argue, attempting a pathetic last stand to salvage his ruined reputation, but Winston Harrington raised his hand and completely silenced the man. The billionaire collector stepped forward completely, ignoring the executives who were now sweating profusely and frantically whispering to each other about massive corporate liability. Winston walked right up to me, his intense, intimidating gaze assessing me with an entirely new level of profound respect. The aggressive purple fury had completely vanished from his face, replaced by absolute, unadulterated awe. He looked at the painting, then back at me, letting out a low, booming chuckle that echoed powerfully off the gallery walls. He declared loudly to the entire room that he had been buying fine art for 40 years, and had never seen an expert dismantle a multi-million-dollar fraud with such lethal, magnificent precision. He turned his back on the senior partners, deliberately dismissing their entire existence. He looked me square in the eye and stated that he was currently in the process of comprehensively auditing his entire $50 million private collection. He demanded with absolute unwavering authority that I take over the exclusive management and appraisal of his entire estate, effective immediately, and he loudly proclaimed he completely refused to work with a single other person in the building. The deafening silence that followed Winston Harrington's demand was absolute music to my ears. Mr. Montgomery, the senior managing partner who had smugly marched me toward the exit just moments ago, stood completely paralyzed. The horrifying realization of what had almost transpired washed over his rigid, aging features. If I had simply obeyed his unjust suspension and walked out the revolving doors, the firm would have sold a high-profile forgery to an aggressively litigious billionaire. The resulting multi-million-dollar lawsuit would have completely incinerated the auction house's century-old reputation. Instead, the very woman he had humiliated was the only reason his prestigious firm was not currently burning to the ground. Mr. Montgomery swallowed hard, stepping forward to desperately salvage the wreckage. He stammered out a frantic, disjointed apology to Winston, attempting to assure the angry collector that the firm held itself to the highest possible standards. Winston ignored him entirely, keeping his intense, intimidating gaze locked firmly on me. I turned my attention away from the billionaire and focused directly on the senior appraiser who had so eagerly rushed to take my place. His name was Gregory, a mediocre evaluator who had spent the last 3 years taking credit for my extensive research. I knew exactly why he had been so quick to support my sudden suspension. I looked at Gregory with surgical precision, my voice ringing clearly across the quiet viewing room. I informed Mr. Montgomery that perhaps he should investigate exactly how my confidential, highly protected personnel file had been leaked to an outside party. I stated that Bradley, my vindictive soon-to-be ex-husband, did not magically acquire the direct line to the managing partner's private office. He needed an internal accomplice to orchestrate the sabotage. I revealed that I had personally caught Gregory copying my proprietary client contact lists 2 weeks prior. I confidently explained that Gregory had colluded with Bradley to fabricate the vicious lies about my financial instability. Gregory wanted my upcoming promotion, and Bradley wanted me entirely destitute. It was a perfectly executed, mutually beneficial arrangement, born out of pure malice and professional jealousy. Gregory's face drained of all color. He took a stumbling step backward, his eyes darting frantically around the room, completely unable to formulate a coherent defense. He stammered, attempting to deny the accusation, but his sheer panic was an absolute, undeniable confession. Mr. Montgomery's expression shifted from deep embarrassment to explosive, unadulterated fury. The managing partner finally understood that he had been aggressively manipulated by a jealous subordinate and a vindictive spouse. Without a single ounce of hesitation, Mr. Montgomery turned to the head of building security. He ordered the massive guards to strip Gregory of his credentials immediately and physically escort him off the property. Gregory was fired on the spot, his entire career instantly annihilated in front of the most powerful collectors in Chicago. As the guards dragged a protesting Gregory out of the VIP gallery, Mr. Montgomery turned back to me. His previous arrogance was entirely gone, replaced by a desperate, sweating need to retain my services. He cleared his throat, formally apologizing for his egregious error in judgment. He acknowledged that my expertise had just saved the firm from an apocalyptic financial disaster. Right there in front of Winston Harrington and the gathered executives, Mr. Montgomery offered me the official title of Director of Appraisal. He promised to double my current salary, effectively matching the compensation package of the senior partners, and offered me a dedicated independent team of junior researchers. He was practically begging me to stay, hoping the massive financial incentive would completely erase the brutal disrespect I had suffered earlier that morning. I stood perfectly still, letting his desperate offer hang heavily in the air. Bradley had orchestrated this entire scenario to utterly destroy my professional reputation and guarantee my absolute financial ruin. He wanted me fired, humiliated, and begging for scraps. Instead, his malicious sabotage had backfired with spectacular, unimaginable precision. He had accidentally provided me with the ultimate stage to prove my undeniable, irreplaceable worth. I looked at Mr. Montgomery, my expression remaining completely stoic. I told him I would accept the director of appraisal position, but only under my strict, non-negotiable conditions. I demanded full autonomy over the authentication process, direct access to the executive board, and a retroactive signing bonus to compensate for the emotional distress caused by the unjust suspension. I made it absolutely clear that I was no longer a compliant, quiet employee willing to accept disrespect. I was a powerhouse executive dictating her own future. Mr. Montgomery agreed to every single demand, instantly nodding with furious relief. Winston Harrington let out another booming laugh, thoroughly entertained by the massive shift in corporate power. The billionaire slapped his hand against the velvet rope, declaring that he looked forward to doing very lucrative business with the new director. The crisis was officially averted, and I had emerged completely victorious. I spent the next 2 hours securing the gallery, pulling the forged painting from the auction block, and organizing my new corner office. The transition was flawless. When the afternoon concluded, I gathered my belongings and walked out the heavy glass revolving doors of the auction house. The crisp Chicago wind hit my face, but I felt absolutely invincible. I had just crushed my husband's sabotage and secured a massive, life-changing promotion. I pulled my coat tighter around my shoulders, preparing to hail a cab. Suddenly, my cell phone vibrated violently inside my coat pocket. I reached in and pulled it out, seeing my brother-in-law's name flashing brightly across the digital screen. I swiped to answer, expecting a celebratory check-in. Instead, Jamal's voice came through the speaker, carrying a sharp, dangerous edge of absolute urgency. "Nat, we have a massive problem," Jamal said, the tension in his voice immediately freezing the blood in my veins. "Bradley just tried to access the offshore accounts. He knows he is locked out." I stood frozen on the sidewalk as the chaotic noise of Chicago traffic blurred into the background. Jamal's words echoed through the phone speaker. He explained that his security tracking protocols had just triggered a massive cascade of automated alerts. Bradley was actively attempting to force his way into the Nova Holdings commercial banking portal. He was repeatedly inputting his old master passwords, growing increasingly aggressive with every single failed login attempt. The system had automatically locked him out after the fifth incorrect try. Jamal painted a vivid picture of the panic currently unfolding in Bradley's luxury hotel suite. He said Bradley was frantically dialing the elite corporate banking hotline, screaming at the customer service representatives. He was demanding immediate access to his $3 million payout, claiming there had been a catastrophic system error that restricted his executive privileges. But the bank tellers were simply reading the legally binding notarized documents Jamal had uploaded earlier that week. They calmly informed my furious husband that he was no longer listed as an authorized representative for Nova Holdings, LLC. They told him that according to their newly updated corporate registry, he had absolutely zero legal standing to access the corporate funds or even view the account balances. Bradley was effectively screaming at a solid brick wall. A sudden wave of intense anxiety washed over me. I gripped my phone tighter, the cold wind whipping my hair across my face. I asked Jamal if Bradley could call the police and report the $3 million as stolen property. I worried that his high-priced lawyers would simply file an emergency injunction and freeze the accounts before our final court date. Jamal let out a deep, reassuring laugh that instantly calmed my racing heart. He explained the absolute brilliance of the trap we had set. He stated clearly that Bradley could not call the police, the FBI, or any other financial authority. If Bradley marched into a police station and formally claimed that $3 million had been stolen from him, he would have to explain exactly where that money came from and why it was hidden inside a shell company registered to his soon-to-be ex-wife during an active divorce proceeding. Jamal outlined the brutal reality of Bradley's situation. Reporting the funds stolen would require a full sworn admission of intentional federal tax evasion, corporate embezzlement, and actively hiding marital assets from a family court judge. Those actions constituted severe federal felonies. If Bradley attempted to reclaim his golden parachute through any official legal channels, he would be handing prosecutors a direct one-way ticket to federal prison. He was completely trapped in a cage of his own making, forced to watch his stolen fortune vanish without being able to cry for help. I arrived at Rachel and Jamal's house an hour later. The atmosphere inside was buzzing with focused electric energy. Tomorrow was the final divorce, hearing the ultimate showdown, where the judge would issue the permanent dissolution of our marriage. We needed to be flawlessly prepared. Rachel immediately dragged me upstairs to her expansive walk-in closet. She declared that I could not walk into that courtroom looking like the defeated, broken woman Bradley expected to see. She pulled out a stunning razor-sharp designer power suit in a deep, commanding shade of emerald green. She told me to put it on and step into a pair of sleek, intimidating stiletto heels. I looked at myself in the full-length mirror. The tailored lines of the suit completely transformed my posture. I did not look like a discarded wife begging for scraps. I looked like an untouchable corporate executive ready to execute a hostile takeover. My sister stood behind me, adjusting the collar of the jacket with a proud, fierce smile on her face. She told me I looked like a woman who owned everything she walked into. Downstairs in the command center, Jamal was finalizing the ultimate weapon. We sat together at his massive desk, systematically compiling a devastating physical dossier. We printed out the flawless high-resolution banking statements, showing the exact moment the $3 million hit the Nova Holdings account. We included the legally binding, heavily notarized mediation contract, where Bradley explicitly forced me to take 100% total ownership of the LLC. Then Jamal pulled out his phone and connected it to a small external speaker. Over the last 12 hours, Bradley had realized the catastrophic magnitude of his mistake. He had left 14 frantic, unhinged voicemails on my blocked phone number. We listened as his voice shifted from arrogant demands to pure, desperate begging, and finally into violent, screaming threats. He promised to destroy me, to ruin my life, and to drag me through the mud if I did not return his money immediately. The sheer panic in his voice was absolute music to my ears. Jamal carefully extracted the audio files and transferred them onto a secure encrypted flash drive. We slid the drive into the growing stack of damning evidence. We had built an impenetrable case that exposed every single layer of his malicious deception. I gathered the thick stack of financial statements, the notarized mediation agreement, and the silver flash drive containing his aggressive threats. I aligned the edges of the papers perfectly, feeling the heavy, spectacular weight of my impending victory resting right in my hands. I carefully slid the entire collection of evidence into a thick, heavy manila envelope. I pulled off the adhesive strip and pressed the flap down hard, sealing the document securely inside. I ran my thumb along the closed edge, ensuring it was firmly shut. I looked up at Rachel and Jamal, giving them a single determined nod. The trap was fully armed. The evidence was irrefutable. The stage was officially set for the final brutal showdown before the judge. I slept that night with a powerful sense of profound peace that I had not experienced in over a decade of living in his shadow. When the morning of the final divorce hearing finally arrived, I woke up before my alarm even had a chance to ring. I slipped into the emerald green power suit Rachel had selected for me, fastening the sleek buttons with absolute precision. I gathered the heavy manila envelope containing my financial salvation and stepped out into the biting morning air. The crisp, cool Chicago weather perfectly mirrored my incredibly sharp, unyielding focus. The cold wind whipped violently against my tailored jacket as I walked up the wide concrete steps of the downtown courthouse. I did not look down at the pavement. I kept my chin elevated, feeling the solid, rhythmic click of my stiletto heels echoing with immense authority against the stone stairs. I walked through the heavy security checkpoints with an unshakable sense of calm, my destination completely clear in my mind. The corridor outside Judge Harrison's courtroom was a long, polished stretch of institutional marble and imposing oak doors. As I rounded the corner, I spotted the entire opposing force waiting exactly where I expected them to be. Bradley stood near a wooden bench, flanked by his high-priced attorney, Mr. Blackwood. Hovering immediately behind them like eager judgmental vultures were his parents Thomas and Catherine. Sloane was leaning casually against the courtroom wall wearing a tight crimson dress that screamed for inappropriate attention. The moment Catherine spotted me walking down the hall, she loudly cleared her throat to ensure the entire group turned my way. Her eyes raked aggressively over my emerald suit, her face twisting into a deeply familiar mask of condescending pity. Thomas and Catherine aggressively stepped directly into my path, effectively blocking my way to the heavy courtroom doors. Catherine let out a short, mocking laugh, her gaze intentionally dropping to the heavy manila envelope clutched securely under my arm. She told me it was utterly pathetic that I was still trying to fight an unwinnable battle against her brilliant son. She loudly proclaimed that I should have simply accepted my miserable defeat and walked away quietly instead of embarrassing myself in front of a respected family court judge today. Thomas chimed in, crossing his thick arms over his chest with extreme arrogance. He sneered, stating that I was walking out of this marriage with absolutely nothing but a failed business and a mountain of toxic corporate debt. He actually had the audacity to tell me that I should be extremely grateful they did not press criminal charges against me for attempting to steal their son's hard-earned company records during our last encounter. I maintained my perfectly rigid posture, refusing to grant them a single ounce of emotional reaction to feed their toxic egos. Seeing that her future in-laws were failing to break my solid composure, Sloane eagerly pushed her way to the front of the group. She aggressively thrust her left hand forward intentionally, flashing a massive, blinding diamond ring directly in my face. She laughed a high, melodic, theatrical laugh that echoed obnoxiously down the marble corridor and bounced off the high ceilings. She proudly announced that she and Bradley were flying out for an exclusive, highly expensive ski vacation to Aspen, the absolute second this boring legal formality was concluded. She leaned closer to me, her expensive floral perfume filling the space between us with a suffocating artificial sweetness. She told me I should probably go straight from the courthouse to a local homeless shelter to secure a good bed before the evening rush hour began. She bragged that Bradley had already booked a private jet for their romantic getaway, funding the entire trip with the exact same money I had desperately tried to hoard. I simply stared at her, my face a completely blank, unreadable slate. Bradley finally stepped forward, placing a possessive, controlling hand on Sloane's lower back. He instructed his aggressive parents to step aside, claiming he wanted to handle this final interaction personally. He backed me slowly against the cool marble wall, using his physical size to attempt absolute intimidation before we faced the judge. His eyes were dark cold and swirling with unchecked toxic arrogance. He leaned his head down, bringing his mouth mere inches from my ear so his high-priced lawyer could not hear the vicious threat he was about to deliver. He told me that he had successfully beaten me at every single turn of this miserable process. He bragged that his brilliant corporate maneuvers had left me entirely destitute and totally powerless against his massive legal resources. He declared with absolute terrifying certainty that I would never touch a single dime of his money again. He pulled his head back and looked me dead in the eye, his expression completely devoid of any human empathy or lingering affection. "Today, you officially become a nobody," he whispered, his voice dripping with absolute venom and pure hatred. The sheer magnitude of his delusion was staggering to behold. He truly believed he was the smartest man in the entire building. He firmly thought I was a broken, devastated woman, desperately clinging to a worthless pile of papers in a pathetic bid for survival. I did not flinch. I did not step away from his aggressive physical proximity. I did not let a single tear form in my eye. I looked right back into his cold, arrogant eyes, feeling the spectacular weight of the heavy manila envelope pressed firmly against my side. A slow, chilling smile spread across my face, revealing my absolute undeniable confidence to the man who had severely underestimated my incredible determination today. "We will see," I said quietly. The heavy, polished oak doors to the courtroom suddenly swung wide open. The stern, uniformed bailiff stepped out into the quiet hallway and loudly called our specific case number, ordering everyone to enter the large room immediately. The heavy oak doors swung shut behind us with a loud, resounding thud that completely severed us from the chaotic noise of the marble hallway. The courtroom was vast, freezing cold, and deeply intimidating. The dark wood paneling and the towering ceilings were specifically designed to command absolute authority. I walked down the center aisle feeling my heels click against the floorboards. My emerald green power suit felt like impenetrable armor. I took my seat on the right side of the room beside my attorney, Mr. Caldwell, a man who possessed a quiet, lethal intelligence perfectly matched for today's battle. Directly across the aisle, Bradley and his ruthless attorney, Mr. Blackwood, settled into their respective chairs. Bradley immediately leaned back aggressively, spreading his arms across the top of his chair and crossing his legs at the ankle. He exuded an overwhelming aura of complete, unshakable invincibility. Sitting high above us on the elevated mahogany bench was Judge Harrison. He was a seasoned, highly respected veteran of the Chicago family court system. He was widely known as a man who possessed absolutely zero tolerance for legal theatrics, perjury, or corporate manipulation. Judge Harrison adjusted his thick reading glasses, banged his heavy wooden gavel a single authoritative time, and officially called our dissolution of marriage hearing to order. His sharp, penetrating gaze swept across the quiet room, analyzing both legal tables with clinical detachment before he formally instructed the petitioner to present their opening arguments. Mr. Blackwood stood up immediately, buttoning his expensive suit jacket with a practiced, highly theatrical flourish. He confidently approached the center podium, resting his hands flat on the wood, and launched into a deeply fabricated, wildly aggressive narrative explicitly designed to destroy my character. He looked directly at Judge Harrison and officially requested that the court permanently waive any and all forms of spousal support, alimony, or financial division of assets. With a look of profound, entirely manufactured sympathy, Mr. Blackwood presented a thick stack of heavily redacted, falsified financial documents to the court clerk. He painted a tragic, compelling picture of my arrogant husband. He claimed with complete conviction that Bradley was a hard-working, innovative visionary whose tech startup had catastrophically failed under the crushing weight of an unpredictable economic downturn. According to the lawyer, Bradley was currently drowning in massive corporate liabilities and facing aggressive, relentless personal debt that would take several decades to fully resolve. Mr. Blackwood argued passionately that his client was essentially a destitute man, completely stripped of his assets, fighting desperately just to keep his head above water. He urged the court to recognize that Bradley simply had absolutely no liquid capital left to offer his estranged wife. Without taking a single breath, Mr. Blackwood seamlessly pivoted his vicious legal attack directly onto me. He painted me as a lazy burden, coasting entirely on Bradley's massive financial sacrifices. He told the judge that my demanding career as an estate appraiser was nothing but a frivolous, low-income hobby that contributed absolutely zero tangible value to the marital estate. He claimed I was a greedy woman desperately trying to squeeze blood from a stone by dragging out this divorce proceeding. I kept my eyes fixed straight ahead, maintaining my rigid stoic expression, but in my peripheral vision, I could clearly see the gallery. Sloane was sitting right in the front row, directly behind Bradley. She was visibly grinning, shifting excitedly in her wooden seat, completely unable to contain her malicious joy. She crossed her legs, letting her bright red designer heels dangle, thoroughly enjoying the brutal character assassination unfolding right before her eyes. Every single time Mr. Blackwood labeled me a financial parasite or an ungrateful burden, Sloane would let out a quiet, scoffing laugh. She repeatedly exchanged triumphant, glowing looks with Catherine and Thomas, who were sitting rigidly right beside her, nodding eagerly at every single lie the lawyer spun. Bradley simply stared at me from his table, a vicious, highly satisfied smirk plastered across his face. He was completely convinced that his expensive legal bulldog was successfully burying me alive right in front of the judge. The sheer audacity of their performance was staggering to witness. Mr. Blackwood spent another 20 minutes meticulously breaking down a totally fabricated list of severe corporate debts, begging the court to legally enforce the deeply manipulative mediation contract I had signed 2 weeks prior. He loudly insisted the court hold me entirely liable for Nova Holdings, LLC, reiterating it was a toxic asset filled with my own failed business debts. He concluded his aggressive opening statement by asking the court to grant the divorce immediately and release his broke, suffering client from my greedy grasp. He stepped back from the podium, giving Bradley a subtle, victorious nod before taking his seat. Judge Harrison turned his very stern, intimidating gaze toward our side of the quiet courtroom. He asked my attorney if we had a rebuttal or counterclaims to present against this overwhelming declaration of total bankruptcy. Mr. Caldwell did not scramble to frantically gather his scattered legal notes. He did not look panicked at all, and he certainly did not prepare a long defensive speech to ever counter Mr. Blackwood's aggressive theatrics. Instead, my attorney calmly pushed his chair back and stood up in the dead-silent courtroom. He bypassed the traditional verbal argument entirely. He did not say a single word about Bradley's fabricated debts or my supposed lack of career ambition. He simply picked up the heavy sealed manila envelope resting perfectly in the center of our table. This was the exact same envelope Jamal and I had meticulously packed with irrefutable, completely devastating financial evidence the night before. Mr. Caldwell adjusted his suit jacket, stepped around the heavy wooden table, and walked with slow, deliberate, and highly dangerous purpose directly up to Judge Harrison's elevated bench. He respectfully handed the sealed envelope directly over to the waiting judge, without showing a single ounce of fear or any physical hesitation at all. The heavy manila envelope lands on the polished wood of Judge Harrison's elevated desk with a soft, definitive smack. The entire courtroom falls into an absolute, breathless silence. Mr. Caldwell bows his head slightly and returns to his seat beside me without uttering a single syllable. Bradley watches this silent, unexpected exchange with narrow, highly suspicious eyes. He shifts uncomfortably in his expensive leather chair, his confident posture fracturing for the very first time today. Mr. Blackwood immediately jumps to his feet, aggressively attempting to object. The high-priced attorney loudly claims this is an unorthodox, highly irregular submission of unverified documents designed to stall the proceedings. Judge Harrison simply holds up a massive, weathered hand, silencing the arrogant lawyer instantly with a single authoritative gesture. Judge Harrison picks up a silver letter opener from his desk. He slices through the heavy adhesive seal of the envelope with a sharp tearing sound that echoes loudly in the quiet room. He pulls out the thick stack of papers. The very first document on top is the comprehensive, irrefutable forensic financial report meticulously prepared by Jamal. The judge pushes his reading glasses up the bridge of his nose. He begins to read. The silence in the vast courtroom stretches out, becoming thick, heavy, and incredibly suffocating. The only sound is the crisp rustle of thick paper as Judge Harrison slowly flips from one page to the next. His eyes scan the certified banking statements showing the massive corporate buyout. He reviews the exact routing numbers tracking the $3 million golden parachute moving through the digital financial system. He traces the undeniable electronic footprints Jamal so expertly uncovered. Then the judge pulls out the legally binding, heavily notarized mediation agreement. It is the exact same contract Bradley brutally forced me to sign under extreme psychological duress just 2 weeks ago in that freezing glass conference room. Judge Harrison places the two documents side by side on his elevated bench. He looks closely at the corporate tax identification numbers. He looks directly at the final signature lines. For a long, agonizing minute, absolutely nothing happens. The tension in the air is so thick, it feels like a physical weight pressing down on everyone's shoulders. Then something entirely unprecedented occurs in the rigid, deeply serious environment of the Chicago family court. Judge Harrison's incredibly stern, deeply lined face suddenly cracks. A low, rumbling sound vibrates in his chest. He actually bursts out laughing. It is not a polite, restrained chuckle. It is a loud, booming, genuine laugh of pure, unadulterated astonishment that echoes powerfully off the high vaulted ceilings of the courtroom. Mr. Blackwood looks utterly bewildered, his mouth hanging slightly open. Bradley aggressively grips the edges of his defendant table, his knuckles turning stark white as sheer panic begins to flood his system. The judge shakes his head in absolute disbelief, removing his reading glasses and wiping a tear of mirth from his eye. He leans heavily over the elevated wooden bench, staring directly down at my arrogant, cheating husband. "Oh, this is good," Judge Harrison says, his voice carrying clearly across the massive room, completely shattering the remaining silence. "This is genuinely spectacular. Let me get this straight, Mr. Bradley. You stood before this court today and confidently claimed total devastating bankruptcy. You allowed your attorney to present fabricated documents claiming your tech startup had completely failed. But according to these certified, federally tracked banking records, your company was actually acquired in a highly lucrative, entirely silent buyout. You personally received a $3 million executive payout for your role in the merger. You then deliberately transferred those $3 million of marital assets into a domestic shell company to completely hide the massive fortune from this court and from your wife." The judge pauses, letting a sharp predatory grin spread across his face as he looks at the specific corporate registry details. But to avoid paying expensive legal fees and leaving a paper trail with a new corporate lawyer, you simply used your wife's dormant LLC to do it. He asks, the sheer disbelief radiating from his words. The devastating truth hits the opposing table with the destructive force of a massive meteor. The color instantly and completely drains from Bradley's face, leaving him looking like a sickly, terrified ghost. His confident, smug demeanor is violently annihilated in a fraction of a second. His jaw drops completely open, but absolutely no sound comes out of his mouth. He is suffocating on his own colossal stupidity. Mr. Blackwood aggressively snatches the duplicate copy of the documents from the court clerk. He frantically scans the pages, his eyes widening in sheer absolute horror as he realizes his arrogant client lied to him and committed a massive, easily provable federal crime right under his nose. In the gallery directly behind them, the arrogant facade violently crumbles. Sloane gasps loudly, a sharp, ugly sound of pure panic. Her perfectly manicured hands fly to her face in utter shock. Her expensive designer purse slips from her trembling fingers and crashes loudly onto the hardwood floor, spilling expensive cosmetics and car keys everywhere. She stares at Bradley, finally realizing the wealthy titan she thought she stole is actually a complete fraud. Catherine and Thomas freeze completely in their seats, their eyes bulging out of their heads as they watch their brilliant genius son instantly transform into a documented, undeniable criminal facing total financial ruin. I sit perfectly still in my emerald green power suit, maintaining absolute, unwavering eye contact with Bradley. He slowly turns his head to look at me, his eyes wide with a sudden, suffocating realization of his catastrophic failure. He knows he is completely trapped. He knows Jamal's digital locks are unbreakable. He knows he handed me the absolute legal key to his entire hidden fortune because he thought I was too stupid to understand what I was signing. The courtroom suddenly erupts into panicked, chaotic whispers as the gallery processes the massive financial revelation, but Judge Harrison aggressively bangs his heavy wooden gavel, demanding immediate silence. The sharp crack echoes like a gunshot, instantly freezing the room once more. The judge glares down at the defense table with lethal, uncompromising authority. Judge Harrison raises his gavel high in the air, his voice booming with undeniable legal finality. "Mr. Bradley, not only have you committed blatant perjury and severe financial fraud in my courtroom, but according to this legally binding mediation document, you aggressively forced your wife to sign she is the sole owner of that LLC. That $3 million is legally hers." The courtroom exploded into absolute bedlam the second Judge Harrison struck his gavel. The illusion of Bradley's untouchable empire shattered into millions of worthless pieces. Mr. Blackwood, recognizing an unwinnable situation, did not even attempt to argue or file an appeal. The high-priced defense attorney simply snapped his genuine leather briefcase shut, leaned over to Bradley, and muttered that he would be withdrawing as counsel immediately. He walked out of the courtroom without looking back. Behind the defense table, the reality of the situation violently crashed into Sloane. Her face twisted from a mask of wealthy entitlement into one of pure, unadulterated rage. She realized in real time that the brilliant rich executive she had tethered herself to was actually a penniless fraud headed straight for federal prison. Sloane stood up abruptly, her chair scraping aggressively against the hardwood floor. She stared at Bradley with absolute disgust. With shaking, furious hands, she reached behind her neck and unclasped the blinding diamond tennis necklace. She yanked the heavy jewelry free, marched directly up to the wooden railing, and hurled the diamonds forcefully at Bradley's chest. The necklace struck his custom-tailored suit jacket and clattered onto the floor. "You are a pathetic broke fraud," Sloane screamed, her voice completely devoid of her usual melodic sweetness. She turned on her designer heel and stormed out of the gallery, leaving her spilled cosmetics and her ruined future lying in the dust. She did not cast a single backward glance at the man she claimed to love just 20 minutes earlier. The devastating spectacle left Thomas and Catherine completely paralyzed in their wooden gallery seats. The arrogant, toxic in-laws who had forcefully invaded my home and threatened me with homelessness were now entirely mute. Their pristine social standing, their lavish country club memberships, and their arrogant pride were thoroughly annihilated. They stared at their son in sheer horror, fully understanding that their own financial safety net had just been incinerated. They had banked their entire retirement on Bradley's massive corporate success. Now they were officially the parents of a documented federal criminal. Judge Harrison was not finished delivering his brutal justice. He adjusted his microphone and issued a series of rapid, devastating legal orders. The judge officially mandated that Bradley's remaining meager personal accounts be entirely frozen effective immediately. He instructed the court clerk to forward the full transcript of today's hearing, along with Jamal's comprehensive forensic financial report, directly to the federal prosecutor's office for a swift criminal investigation regarding wire fraud and tax evasion. The judge made it completely clear that Bradley would not be leaving the building as a free man. He signaled the two armed bailiffs standing by the heavy oak doors, directing them to step forward and secure the petitioner. Bradley finally understood the absolute, inescapable finality of his situation. The arrogant, vindictive mastermind was entirely gone. He stumbled away from the defense table, his legs trembling violently. He ignored the approaching bailiffs and lunged toward my side of the aisle. His expensive suit was wrinkled, his perfectly styled hair now a chaotic mess. He gripped the heavy wooden railing, separating us, his eyes wide and completely desperate. "Natalie, please," Bradley begged, his voice cracking with pathetic raw terror. "You have to help me. You cannot let them do this. I made a massive mistake. I was stressed. I was not thinking clearly. We can fix this. Please, Nat. I am your husband." I looked down at the man who had gleefully handed me an eviction notice, who had mocked my career, who had stolen my life savings, and who had actively tried to destroy my professional reputation. I did not feel a single ounce of pity. I did not feel an ounce of anger. I felt absolutely nothing for him. I slowly picked up my leather tote bag and pushed my chair back. I stood up tall in my emerald green power suit, adjusting my collar with flawless, practiced precision. I looked Bradley dead in his tear-filled eyes. I did not raise my voice. I did not offer a dramatic speech or a spiteful insult. I simply gave him a look of absolute chilling indifference. I turned my back on his desperate pleading, linked my arms with Rachel and Jamal, and walked straight down the center aisle. I walked right past Thomas and Catherine without a single glance. I marched out the heavy oak doors, leaving Bradley sobbing uncontrollably as the bailiffs grabbed his arms to pull him away. 6 months later, the cold Chicago winter had melted into a bright, vibrant spring. Bradley was no longer wearing custom-tailored Italian suits. He was officially serving a lengthy sentence in a federal correctional facility for severe wire fraud and corporate embezzlement. The legal system had completely dismantled his fabricated life. As for me, I stood leaning against the glass railing of the expansive wrap-around balcony of my brand-new downtown Chicago penthouse. The city's skyline sparkled brilliantly under the twilight sky. I had purchased this incredible property with my own legal, fiercely protected money. The $3 million corporate payout had remained securely in my accounts, entirely untouched by Bradley's desperate failed legal appeals. I had not merely survived the destruction of my marriage, I had completely conquered it. I took a deep, refreshing breath of the cool evening air, feeling the undeniable, spectacular weight of my own freedom. Inside the massive, beautifully decorated living room, Rachel and Jamal were laughing as they poured drinks from a crystal decanter. They had been my impenetrable shield during my darkest hours, and now they were here to celebrate my brightest victory. I was officially the director of appraisal at the most prestigious firm in the city, commanding a massive team of experts and exclusively managing Winston Harrington's $50 million private collection. My career was completely unassailable. I walked back inside my beautiful, secure home and accepted a tall glass of expensive champagne from Jamal. I raised my glass to my sister and my brother-in-law, offering a silent, powerful toast to loyalty, sharp strategy, and the absolute beauty of brutal karma. I was no longer a discarded wife begging for scraps. I was a highly successful, independent executive surrounded by the family that actually chose me, completely free and undeniably powerful. The story of Natalie's triumphant rise from the ashes of a devastating betrayal offers a profound reflection on the true nature of independence and self-worth. When her life was systematically dismantled by a deceitful partner and his toxic family, it would have been easy for her to succumb to despair. However, the ultimate lesson embedded in her journey is that true security is never handed to us by someone else. It must be built fiercely protected and deeply rooted in our own unshakable capabilities. Often we invest our entire identities and financial safety into relationships operating under the illusion that our sacrifices will be reciprocated with loyalty. Natalie sacrificed her own comfort to build her husband's foundation, only to realize that toxic individuals view such generosity as a weakness to be exploited. The turning point in her narrative was not just the discovery of the hidden funds, but her conscious decision to stop playing the victim and start playing the strategist. By maintaining a quiet, calculated composure in the face of psychological warfare, she weaponized her abuser's immense arrogance against him. Furthermore, this story illustrates the importance of surrounding yourself with genuine support. Blood ties and marital vows mean absolutely nothing without mutual respect. Natalie found her true armor in the unwavering loyalty of her chosen family, who stood as her shield when she was most vulnerable. We learn that we do not have to accept disrespect, nor do we have to shout to prove our strength. True power lies in knowing your absolute worth, setting unbreakable boundaries, and recognizing that losing toxic people is not a tragedy, it is a spectacular elevation. Take a moment today to evaluate your own boundaries and leave a comment below, sharing how you have reclaimed your power from those who underestimated you.